I had known Kelly for a long time. We first met as kids, growing up in the same small town where our families were closely connected through the local farming industry. Her dad owned the grain elevator, and mine ran the largest farm in the area. It seemed inevitable that Kelly and I would end up together, and over time we built a relationship that eventually led to marriage. Despite the occasional ups and downs, I always believed we had something solid. At first, our life together was like any other married couple's, full of happy moments and the usual challenges. But over time, I started noticing a change. Kelly became distant, and I felt the closeness we once shared was slipping away. I had no idea that this distance was just a symptom of something much bigger that I was about to discover. I'm not usually one to visit adult websites, but one hot July evening a few months ago, curiosity got the better of me. I not only browsed the content, but I also ended up paying $100 for a premium membership. What I saw that night was a live stream featuring a gorgeous woman in a steamy scene with a muscular, attractive guy. I'd seen better before, but something about this video stood out. Why? Because the woman, going by the name Jenna, was actually my wife, Kelly. The site, Nature's Pleasure Spa, was aptly named because she was definitely having hot Zexand, enjoying every bit of it. As Kelly rolled over on the bed, looking completely satisfied, the guy grinned and said, "Well, darling, that was pretty damn good. Bet your old man never makes you climax like that, huh?" "Hot housewife Jenna?" My Kelly smiled back and said without missing a beat, "Well, Mario, that was good, no doubt. But for the record, no one lights me up like my husband. I've been with a few guys, but no one makes me happy like he does. You're good, but he's amazing, so don't stop trying." She smiled again. Mario looked puzzled and asked, "Well, if he's so amazing, why are you cheating on him by coming here and being with me?" She responded, still smiling. "I didn't plan on this happening, but I love Zex, and I'm glad you take care of me. I also do it because I can get away with it and he'll never know. I truly love my husband with all my heart, and after these 3 nights here, I realize just how much better he is than what I get here. It makes me love and appreciate him even more." She laughed and added, "Actually, I'm probably doing him a favor by coming here and doing this, so come on over and drill me again." Like I said earlier, the $100 was money well spent because it allowed me to see what was going on with my loving wife, and it cost a lot less than hiring a private investigator or buying surveillance equipment. You're probably wondering how I got to this point. What led me to visit that site in the first place? It's a fair question, and the most honest answer I can give is that it was just a fluke, a stroke of luck. Not that my wife was sleeping with Mario, but that I found out she was cheating. Kelly and I have been married for just over 8 years. We first met in elementary school and grew up in a small town in central Illinois. She lived in town and I lived in the country. Her dad owned the largest grain elevator, and my dad owned the biggest farm. Since our parents did business together, it was natural for us to meet and become friends. I won't bore you with childhood crushes, high school romance, or even college. We both dated other people and yes, slept with others. We weren't exclusive. But deep down, I think we always knew we belonged together. Oh, and yes, I was the one who took her pureness, though there were others for both of us along the way. During our junior year at the University of Illinois, we decided to be exclusive. A bit later, I proposed, and about 1.5 years later, just a week after graduation, we were married. Life seemed good, at least I thought it was, until that night in July. But anyway, back to the story. 3 years ago, Kelly's parents retired and moved to Phoenix, Arizona. Kelly, along with her sister Amber and brothers Tom and Carl Gentry, bought a 48% stake in the family grain business from their father, Tom Sr. He wanted to keep controlling interest for a few years to back their growth financially. Over time, he planned to reduce his stake until they owned the business outright. Amber is married to my friend Walter Swanson, who also happens to be a grain farmer. His farm is just a bit smaller than mine, and since we live nearby, we spend a lot of time together. Tom and Carl manage the grain business together, while Kelly handles the finances and bookkeeping. Amber also works there, managing customer relations and grain sales. It's a true family-run operation, with a few additional employees, mostly truck drivers and grain handlers. During the busy harvest season, they hire some part-time help as well. That's enough background. Now let me get back to the story of how I discovered my wife cheating online and what unfolded afterward. All 4 of the Gentry siblings put a lot of effort into finalizing the deal to buy out their father's share of the grain business. I wasn't too involved in it, but I knew they had to work hard to make it happen. There were meetings with banks, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, and insurance companies. By the time it was all settled, they were exhausted. Luckily, this all took place during winter, their slowest time of year. As for me, it was after harvest, so I didn't need Kelly's help on the farm as much as I would during the busy season. While she doesn't work on the farm directly, with 2,200 acres of corn and soybeans, planting and harvest times are hectic, and I rely on Kelly to run errands and assist where needed. You get the idea. Since things were slow, Kelly and Amber decided to treat themselves to a few days at a spa to unwind. They booked a 3-night stay at a place called Princess Spas. I know I previously mentioned Nature's Pleasures Spa, but that's the name of the website. Princess Spas is the actual spa. The ladies came back so relaxed and refreshed that they made it a yearly tradition, booking another stay the following July, after planting season was over. It was during that weekend spa visit that I stumbled upon the video. But how did I find it in the first place? Dan Marvel, the field agent for the Illinois Department of Agriculture in our area, stopped by one day during his routine rounds. Kelly and I knew Dan from college. When he asked about her, I mentioned she was on a getaway at Princess Spas. He gave me a strange look and mentioned that something odd was going on there that I might want to check out. He said his cousin used to work there as a masseuse and had shared some wild stories. He also said they had a website with a different name, something with pleasures in it. He didn't give me many details, just advised me to look into it. Well, I'm someone who likes to poke around the internet. I browse different sites, sometimes even stumbling on some spicy content, but usually it's just for fun. That night, curiosity got the better of me, and I did some searching. It didn't take long before I found Nature's Pleasures Spa and its live stream, and that's when everything unraveled. But you already know what happened next. I was devastated. I cried, yelled, got angry, then fell into a deep depression. All the emotions you'd expect when discovering your spouse is cheating. And it wasn't just this one time. I soon realized this wasn't Kelly's first affair. Nature's Pleasures Spa had an archive section, and I found videos from Kelly's previous visits, as well as the ones from the current trip. With the premium membership, I could download each video for an extra $20. I downloaded 2 videos from her first visit, 3 from her second, and 3 from this current trip. 8 videos in total. So, for $260, I had all the evidence I needed to divorce my wife. I didn't have a clear plan yet, but I knew I had to act quickly. I wasn't going to wait a month or even a week to confront her. As far as I was concerned, the sooner we split up, the better. Kelly had slept with at least 2 men, Mario and Steve, 8 times, and I had video proof. I didn't care if there were more, it was already too much. I made several copies of the videos onto DVDs and stored them in a very safe place. When my father built our house, he had a wall safe installed, hidden behind a panel in the office bookcase. Once the copies were secure, I deleted everything related to Nature's Pleasures Spa from my computer, including the original files. Other than the DVDs, there was no longer any digital trail. With that taken care of, I grabbed my phone and sent Kelly a message. Kelly, it's Jack. I know exactly what you're doing at Princess Spa, and I have evidence to prove it. Don't bother coming back to the house. This is no longer your home, and soon I won't be your husband. We're done. My lawyer will be in touch in the next few days to arrange for you to collect your belongings. Apparently, Kelly had turned off her phone and didn't get my message until the next morning, as I didn't hear from her that night. But early the following day, my phone started ringing. I saw it was Kelly calling, so I let it go to voicemail. Soon after, I heard her message. Jack? What are you talking about? Honey, I have no idea what's going on. Why would you send me such terrible messages? Amber and I are packing up now, and I'll be home in a couple of hours. Whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. I'll see you when I get home so we can talk. I love you, Jack. A little while later, she called again, and I ignored it. The voicemail was nearly identical, word for word. I began to wonder if she'd written it down, knowing I wouldn't answer. Soon after, a text came through. Again, almost the same message. Since I wasn't going to talk to her, I sent a short text back to acknowledge her messages, but keep my distance. Maybe Mario knows what I'm talking about, honey. Would you have him call me if I asked? And as I said before, don't come back to the house. You're not welcome here. We're done, Kelly. I didn't get any more texts, but later that afternoon she called again and left another voicemail. Jack, we need to talk. I'm staying with Amber until we clear up this awful misunderstanding. Please call me so we can talk. That was Sunday afternoon, and I didn't return her call. The next morning, I went to my bank and arranged for a second safe deposit box in my name only. I placed one copy of the DVDs in the box, along with the original prenuptial agreement. I had a meeting scheduled with my lawyer at 11 a.m., so I made another copy of the prenup just in case there was any issue. When I arrived at my lawyer's office, I saw Kelly sitting there. She looked up at me, and I could see she was in rough shape. Her hair was a mess, and she had dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept. Kelly said, "Jack, we need to talk about this." I asked, "How did you know I'd be here?" She replied, "Richard called me when you made the appointment." At that moment, Richard Warner, my attorney, came out and asked us both to come into his office. My anger was boiling over, so I said, "No, Richard, we're not going in together. You've lost my trust by calling Kelly. I need to know right now. Are you representing me and only me?" Lawyers are supposed to be smart, but Richard missed the memo because he said, "No, Jack, if this proceeds, I'll be representing Kelly." Turns out he thought the grain business was a better client than my farm. Maybe it was, since he had the Gentry family as clients too. I had my opinion about that, and I figured he'd realize his mistake eventually. Fine, Richard. I want all my original documents and copies of contracts ready by 4 p.m. today. I'll either pick them up or send a courier. I've appreciated your work in the past, but you're making a big mistake. My new attorney will contact you soon. Kelly stayed silent, but then pleaded, "Jack, why won't you talk to me and straighten this out? Because, Kelly, it's clear Richard values you more as a client, and I'm not having this conversation without legal representation." Richard chimed in, "Jack, you know I've always been fair with you. You have nothing to worry about." "Oh, Richard, I have plenty to worry about. You can't serve two masters, and it's clear where your loyalty lies, and you've already shown I can't trust you by calling Kelly." With that, I said goodbye and left. I could hear Kelly starting to cry as I walked out the door. Now I had to find a new attorney. I knew David Warner, Richard's brother, was a skilled attorney and competitive with Richard. He seemed like a good option, but I wanted to do some research first. Attorneys, accountants, bankers, and insurance agents are people you need to trust completely, and I wanted to be sure. I knew a few people who had worked with David, so I called his office to ask for references. The secretary sent me a list, and 4 friends of mine were on it. I stopped by to see 3 of them, and they all gave glowing reviews of David's work, so it didn't take long for me to make up my mind. I had no doubt David would do a good job for me. I didn't visit the 4th friend on the reference list because it was Wally, and I didn't want to involve him since he's married to Amber, Kelly's sister. I called David's office again, gave my name, and asked if I could schedule an appointment for after 4 p.m. The receptionist said he was busy until 4:30, but would check if he could meet after that. I knew there was a chance he wouldn't be able to, but I had to try. When she came back on the line, she said, "Mr. Warner can see you at 4:30, but it'll have to be brief as he has other evening commitments." I agreed and confirmed I'd be there. "I look forward to seeing you then, Mr. Hagen. By the way, my name is Samantha, and I'm David's wife." At 4 p.m., I stopped by Richard's office to collect my paperwork. They hadn't finished copying it yet. It was obvious they were stalling, hoping I'd changed my mind. I lost my temper and told them I needed every piece of legal paperwork within 15 minutes, or my new attorney would follow up. They asked who my new attorney was, and I told them they'd find out soon enough. After that, the office went into overdrive, with 3 people copying documents at once. 20 minutes later, I had everything. I still had time to make it to David's office for my appointment, so I didn't make a bigger fuss about the slight delay. I met with David, and he agreed to become both my personal and business attorney. I asked if I could leave all the documents I'd retrieved with him for safekeeping, and he agreed to store them in his vault until we could review them together. We scheduled an appointment for the next day, Tuesday at 9 a.m., to go over everything and plan for the divorce. When I left his office around 5:30, I smiled at Samantha and asked, "So, Samantha, am I in trouble or are your evening plans still on?" She smiled and said, "You did just fine, Mr. Hagen. Our evening is still on as planned. I wish all our clients were as punctual as you've been, but please call me Sam from now on." "Thanks, Sam, and you can call me Jack." The next morning, we reviewed all my business paperwork and contracts. I can't share details, attorney-client privilege and all that, but I can say David found everything to be in good order from a business standpoint. We broke for lunch, and David and Sam invited me to join them at the local diner. I agreed and met them there as I needed to stop by my bank first. They were a delightful couple, and we had a pleasant lunch. I learned they'd been married for about 10 years and had 2 daughters, ages 6 and 3. They showed me pictures, and the girls were adorable, looking just like their mom. They had beautiful smiles, just like Sam. That lunch lifted my spirits, making my transition to working with David easier. But it also saddened me because I realized my life partner wasn't with me anymore. Seeing how happy David and Sam were reminded me of how things had been with Kelly before I discovered her cheating. It brought tears to my eyes a few times. David didn't notice, but Sam did, and I could see the concern in her eyes. After lunch, I stopped by the bank and made some changes to protect my assets. I also picked up a $5,000 check payable to David Warner Law Offices as a retainer. David hadn't asked for anything yet, but I knew he'd appreciate the gesture. I returned to the office at 1:30 to continue our meeting. Sam greeted me and mentioned David was on the phone, then led me to the small conference room where we'd been meeting. She asked if I wanted coffee or anything else, and I said I was fine. She sat down next to me and reached out her hand. David didn't tell me what's going on, Jack, but based on your reactions at lunch, I can guess what this afternoon is about. I see you're wearing a wedding ring, so I'm assuming it's about your wife. If you'd like, I'd be happy to sit in on the meeting this afternoon while we discuss whatever you need to share. I was on the verge of breaking down again, so I just nodded. My anger had subsided for the moment, and the pain was overwhelming. It felt right to have a woman's presence for the sensitivity and comfort they can offer. I realized I might need Sam's support during this difficult time. In the afternoon meeting, I told the full story of how I discovered Kelly's infidelity. I broke down a few times, and Sam was there to comfort me. After regaining my composure, I explained my intentions. Unless something changes my mind, I'm planning to file for divorce and enforce the prenuptial agreement. David and I went over the prenup in detail. The terms were clear. I would retain 100% of my farm assets, real estate, and personal property. Kelly would keep her grain business assets. She'd be entitled to 50% of our financial assets if there was no infidelity, but only $25,000 for each year of marriage if there was. Household personal property would be split 50-50ths, no matter the circumstances. David then said, "Jack, I need you to show me proof of the infidelity." "No, David, I have the proof, but I'm not showing it to anyone unless we're forced to go to court. Then I'll present it to the judge." David insisted, "Jack, I really need to see it to ensure we have a solid case for infidelity." "David, you're going to have to trust me. I have the proof, but I loved Kelly, and I don't want anyone seeing what I've seen unless it's absolutely necessary." Sam gently touched David's arm and gave him a nod, signaling for him to back off. David reluctantly agreed. Over the next few days, Kelly called me several times, leaving messages, but I never answered. I deleted her voicemails without even listening to them. Then, David called to tell me we had a meeting scheduled with Kelly and her lawyer, Richard, for Thursday at 10:30 a.m. When Thursday came, David and I drove to Richard's office. As we arrived, I noticed Kelly's car in the parking lot, so we headed straight inside. Richard's receptionist showed us to a small conference room, and after just a couple of minutes, Richard and Kelly walked in. Kelly looked much better than the last time I had seen her. It was clear she had made an effort for this meeting. She was undeniably beautiful. I fought hard to keep my emotions hidden, not wanting her to see how much my heart ached. She smiled and said, "Jack, I hope we can finally talk and resolve this misunderstanding. I miss you, and I want to come home." I stayed silent, knowing my voice would betray me if I spoke. I needed to get a grip on my emotions, and it wasn't going to be easy. David started, "We're here to discuss the divorce proceedings for the dissolution of Jack and Kelly's marriage. I believe it's important to give both parties time to express their thoughts on how to move forward." Richard nodded in agreement and added, "My client believes this is a misunderstanding and would like the chance to clear the air with her husband." That was it. My anger flared up, helping me regain control of my emotions. I looked at Kelly and said, "Kelly, here are the facts. When we got married, we signed a prenuptial agreement, and we updated it 2 years ago when you bought into your father's business. I've brought copies of the updated agreement for everyone." Kelly looked surprised and said softly, "But Jack, I don't want a divorce. I want to be your wife. Can't we move past this and be happy again?" I barely acknowledged her words and continued. The prenup was meant to protect our individual interests while still allowing us to benefit from marriage. Initially, it was to protect the assets that have been in my family for generations. When you bought into your father's business, we updated it to protect your family's assets as well in case of divorce. The agreement clearly states that I retain 100% of my family's assets, and you retain 100% of yours. Debts related to those assets remain with the businesses, and neither party is responsible for the other's debts. Our shared marital assets are separate, and the agreement outlines the specific division of those assets depending on the circumstances of the divorce. I continued, As stated in this document, you are entitled to your personal belongings, your clothing, jewelry, car, and anything else that I have no interest in. The same applies to me. All non-farm personal property, furniture, electronics, and artwork will be split 50/50ths. Farm-related property, grain bins, machinery, equipment, stays 100% mine since it's part of the farm operation. Financially, in the event of divorce, you are entitled to 50% of our financial assets if there has been no infidelity. There are 2 exceptions to this. If you divorce me for infidelity, I receive only $25,000 per year, or $200,000 total, not 50%. If I divorce you for infidelity, you receive $25,000 per year, or $200,000 total, not 50%. I paused before saying, Kelly, I'm going to ask you some questions. How you answer will determine whether I move forward with the divorce and on what grounds. That will also determine any financial distribution. If our marriage has any chance of surviving, you need to be completely honest. If you refuse to answer or lie, it's over. Do you understand? Are you willing to do this to try and save our marriage? Kelly, looking stunned by the details of the prenup, snapped out of it and said, Yes, Jack, I'll answer your questions honestly. I love you, and I want our marriage to survive. I'll do whatever it takes for you to let me come home. Kelly, I'd like to record these questions. Are you okay with that? She hesitated and looked at Richard, who had stayed quiet up until now. Richard, in typical lawyer fashion, said, Kelly, I'd advise against it, but it's up to you. David added, Kelly, I agree with Richard. I'd advise against recording, but it's Jack you need to convince, not Richard or me. So do what you think is right. Kelly replied, I'll do anything to clear up this misunderstanding. Yes, go ahead and record it. I'm fine with recording whatever Jack and I discuss. David and I had brought a tape recorder, so we set it on the table to ensure everyone's voices were clearly captured. Kelly then asked, Jack, what are your questions? I began, Kelly, I want to ask if you've been faithful to me, but I'm going to break it into 3 time periods. The first is from the day we agreed to be exclusive until the day we got engaged. Were you faithful to me during that time? Kelly smiled and answered confidently, Yes, Jack, I was faithful to you during that period. I stared at her and said, Well, that's your first lie. You couldn't even answer the very first question honestly. I should walk out right now, but I won't. Yet. Are you really telling me you didn't sleep with Larry Evandale just 2 days after we agreed to be exclusive? Is that what you're saying? Larry wasn't the type to keep things to himself. He bragged to me that you invited him over on a Tuesday night when your parents weren't home, and he had sex with you in your bed. Oh, and Kelly, he also told me you didn't use a rubber. He even smirked and said, Bareback's way more fun when you're with a promiscuous. His parting shot as he walked away was, Jack, she loved it. And I'm sure I'll get a repeat performance, probably even after you marry the promiscuous. You might say he made it all up, but Amber overheard him. She came over to me and said, Jack, Kelly loves you. She won't cheat on you again. That was just a one-time thing, a goodbye to him. Don't do anything rash. Oh, and by the way, he lied. He used rubbers. I saw the wrappers in the trash the next morning. So, Kelly, you've already lied to me. I'll let this one slide, but there won't be any more passes. Tell the truth, or face the consequences. Kelly looked devastated. I'm sorry, Jack. I was wrong. I continued. After that, I didn't trust you. I watched you closely for 6 months. In that time, you didn't do anything suspicious, so I asked you to marry me and gave you the ring. I know you were probably hoping I'd ask sooner, but I wasn't ready to trust you, so you had to wait. Now here's question 2. During our engagement, from the time you got the ring until the day we got married, did you cheat on me? She didn't hesitate. No, absolutely not. I replied, I know that's true because I still didn't trust you completely, so I kept an eye on you for that whole year. I was pretty sure you were faithful during that time. Seeing how emotional Kelly was getting, Richard asked for a break to talk with her. She was clearly shaken by the revelation about Larry Evandale. We took a break for lunch, and David and I picked up Sam to go to the local diner. At lunch, Sam asked how things were going, and David said, I think Jack's handling it well. Not much has come out yet, but he's laid the foundation for getting honest answers about the marriage. If she admits everything, he may still want a divorce, but he'll know she's trying to save the marriage. It's a tough call, but I think Jack will make the right decision. Of course, if she lies, he'll have to figure out his next step. Sam gave me a knowing look. Her intuition had clearly picked up on my pain. I gave her a weak smile and said, This is hard. Why do people do such stupid things and cause so much pain for themselves and the ones they love? She reached over, put her hand on mine, and said, If only we knew, Jack. Maybe we could slap some sense into them before they did something so stupid. That made me laugh, and David joined in. Even during a tough time, I found a way to laugh, which says a lot about the resilience of people. We cry at funerals, but can still laugh. I guess people grieve during divorces, but also find humor. I smiled at Sam and said, "Thanks, Sam. I needed that." She nodded, and we headed back to Richard's office around 1 p.m. Once back in the meeting, I reminded Kelly, "You need to answer honestly. If you lie, this meeting ends, and there's no hope for our marriage. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand," Kelly replied, clearly shaken. "I will tell you the truth." I asked, "From the day we were married until today? Have you ever cheated on me?" Tears filled her eyes, and I could see how hard this was for her. But I couldn't let her off the hook. I needed her to be honest, to prove she cared enough about our marriage to come clean. I wasn't sure if I could stop the divorce, but if she told the whole truth, I'd know she was trying. "Yes, Jack," she said quietly, tears falling. "I did cheat on you." She then dropped her head onto her crossed arms on the table and sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Jack. Can you ever forgive me?" I asked Richard and David to leave the room because I had more questions for Kelly and didn't want to embarrass her in front of them. Both lawyers objected, but I insisted, and Kelly nodded at Richard, signaling that she wanted him to leave too. I already had her confession on tape, which was enough for the divorce proceedings. I didn't want the rest of the conversation recorded, so I turned off the recorder. "Kelly, I need you to answer these questions. When, where, who, and why?" I asked, doing my best to stay calm. Sniffling, she whispered, "Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry. It happened this weekend at Princess Spa. One of the masseurs, Mario, is the one I cheated with." "Why?" I asked. "I don't know exactly, Jack. It was just the passion of the moment. Amber and I were having such a great day, and after dinner we decided to get massages before bed. Mario was my masseuse. I was lying on my stomach, and he started the massage. His hands were soft but strong, and it felt so good. He worked on my arms, shoulders, and back, then moved to my legs and inner thighs, stopping just short of being too close. After that, he started again on my back and shoulders, and I was still tense. I felt him untie my bikini top and pull it down. I have to admit, it felt great, and I didn't stop him." She started crying again. "Jack, if I could go back, I never would have let it happen. We wouldn't be in this situation. You have to believe me." As much as it hurt to hear it, I needed her to tell me everything, not because I was curious, but because I needed to see how honest she'd be. "Go on, Kelly, tell me the rest," I urged. "There's nothing more to tell," she said through her tears. "We had sex." She fell silent, and I waited, hoping she would say more. But she just sat there with her head down, sniffling. Eventually, she looked up at me and asked, "Jack, is there any chance you'll forgive me?" Not wanting this to feel like a court hearing, even though it did, I asked, "Kelly, is this the whole truth? Nothing but the truth?" She gave me a look I hadn't seen before, a mix of uncertainty and fear, as if she was calculating how much I knew. Finally, she said, "Yes, Jack, that's the truth. I'm so sorry." My heart was breaking, but I managed to keep my composure. I got up from the table and called David and Richard back into the room. "This meeting is over," I said coldly. Before leaving, I turned to Kelly and said, "I'm divorcing you on the grounds of infidelity. The terms of the prenuptial agreement will be enforced." She was shocked and cried out, "But why? Jack, I confessed. I'm begging you to forgive me. Please, Jack, I love you. Please forgive me." "You lied to me, Kelly. You didn't care enough about our marriage to tell me everything. If you had been completely honest, maybe I could have considered staying. But you didn't even give us a chance. You thought you could get away with just one confession, but you lied. It's over." I turned to leave, but she screamed, "Wait, Jack! I'll tell you everything. Please don't leave me." I spun around and glared at her, my anger and hurt clear. "You were warned. You had your chance, but you tried to get away with one confession. You lied. It's over." David caught up with me as I was getting into my car. "Jack, are you sure you want to file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity?" he asked. "Yes, I do. She had her chance, and I misjudged her all these years. I wanted her to care enough to tell me everything, but she couldn't even be honest. Go ahead and file." I drove home feeling numb, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat at my desk. I drank the first one quickly, then sipped the second, reflecting on everything that had just happened. I had multiple copies of the videos safely stored. But now, I didn't think I'd need them since I had her confession. Suddenly, it hit me. I'd walked out of the office without the tape of Kelly's confession. I immediately called David. "David, did you grab the tape recording of Kelly's confession before you came after me?" "Oh, damn," I heard him say. "No, Jack, I didn't. I was so focused on catching up with you that I forgot the tape." I cursed under my breath. I had been so careful in planning everything, but in my anger and pain, I had made a huge mistake by leaving the tape behind. "David, why don't you call Richard and see if you can pick it up?" Though I'm guessing their answer will be something like, "We thought you had everything when you left, so we erased it." Sorry. I hung up, still feeling sick about the situation. I had enough evidence to file for infidelity, but I hadn't wanted to use the videos unless it was absolutely necessary. After I hung up with David, I grabbed another beer from the fridge. Damn, how could I be so careless? I wasn't drunk, but I wasn't feeling much pain either. As I sat watching the evening news before bed, I thought I heard a vehicle pull into the yard. Slowly, I got up from my chair and went to the back door. I stepped out onto the porch, and it was dark for a few moments before the lights went out. Suddenly, something shot me on the back of the head, and I saw a bright flash of light. Then, everything went completely dark. Beep, beep, beep. That was the first sound I heard. It didn't take long to realize it was coming from right beside me. I opened my eyes and tried to turn slightly to the right to see what it was. But as soon as I moved, an excruciating pain shot through my chest and straight into my head, causing flashes of blue and silver stars. What the hell? I thought. Then I heard a rustling sound nearby, followed by a surge of something into my body, and I was out again. The next time I woke up to the beeping, I opened my eyes and looked around, being careful not to move. I'd learned my lesson from the first time. A nurse was sitting in a chair beside me. "Hi, Jack. I'm Susan, your nurse. Please don't try to move, okay? You're going to be fine, and I'll explain everything to you. But for now, just stay still. Do you understand?" I couldn't speak because something was lodged down my throat, but I nodded slightly to show that I understood. "Jack, I need to tell the doctor you're awake. We'll be back soon." I nodded again. It finally clicked that I must be in a hospital, though I had no memory of how I got there. I figured someone would fill me in eventually, so I closed my eyes and waited. "Mr. Hagen, Jack, I'm Dr. Julius. You've suffered serious injuries from a striking during a robbery at your home. Now that you're awake, I'm confident you'll be okay. We had to restrain you to prevent you from injuring yourself further by moving too much. I'm sure you felt severe pain when you tried to move yesterday, right?" A faint smile crossed my face as I nodded. "Yes, we should have done more to prevent that. I'm sorry you experienced that pain." He turned to the nurse. "Nurse Johnson, I think we can remove the restraints now. But Jack, please don't try to do anything on your own just yet, okay?" I nodded again and gestured to the tube in my throat. "We'll also remove the ventilator now. Nurse Johnson will handle it." Once they removed the restraints and the ventilator, my throat felt like it was on fire, and I couldn't speak at first. They gave me a small sip of water, and eventually I was able to whisper, though my voice was raspy and painful. "Can someone tell me what happened?" I croaked. "Jack, it's 7 a.m. and you've just regained consciousness and come off the ventilator. Your throat will hurt for a few hours, and we want you to rest. Nurse Johnson will stay with you, and once you're more stable, we'll notify the police that you're able to talk. They'll explain everything that happened. Medically speaking, you've sustained serious injuries, including a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and multiple contusions. One of your ribs punctured a lung, causing it to collapse. But the EMTs got to you in time and were able to revive you. After we repaired your lung, we reinflated it. You're very lucky, Jack. Had you not been found when you were, you likely would have died. To put it bluntly, you were stricken severely. You were unconscious for 5 days. You briefly woke up yesterday, but then passed out again until now. We'll keep a close watch on you for the next few days, but you should be able to go home after that." As promised, I spent the rest of the day resting, with Nurse Johnson by my side. Anytime I moved too quickly, sharp pains shot through my body, so I stayed as still as possible. By the afternoon, I was able to sit up with help and even managed to use the bathroom with assistance. As I spent more time with Susan, we talked, and I learned that she had been 3 years behind me in school. Her maiden name was Susan Fisk, and she had married Chad Johnson. They had a 3-year-old daughter named Emily, but Susan had divorced Chad after finding out he was unfaithful. I told her about Kelly, and she was sympathetic. The next morning, 2 detectives, Harold Robbins and Josh Carter, came to see me. Before they started questioning me, I asked them to explain what had happened to me. Detective Robbins started. "It appears to have been a robbery that escalated into an attack. We found a 2x4 on your porch with your hair and blood on it. There were no fingerprints, likely because the person wore gloves. There weren't any signs of forced entry, but that's probably because you stepped onto the porch and left the door open. Inside the house, we found several missing pictures from the walls, an empty strongbox in your desk drawer, and ransacked file cabinets. The bedrooms were also searched, with empty drawers and jewelry boxes in the master bedroom. We're not entirely sure what was taken, Detective Carter continued. When you're able to return home, we'll need you to go through everything to see what's missing. The doctor said it could be 3 or 4 days before you're discharged. After that, we'll work with you to update our reports. Robbins took over again. We need to ask you a few questions, Jack. What do you remember about the attack? I sighed. Not much, honestly. I had a couple of beers and was watching the evening news when I heard a vehicle pull into the yard. I got up to check it out and stepped onto the porch. I saw a shadowy figure and then everything went black. I don't remember anything after that until I woke up here yesterday. I wish I could be more helpful. Robbins nodded. That's okay, Jack. We still need to ask a few more questions to help piece this together. Where was your wife during the incident? My wife and I are separated. We're in the process of divorcing, so I have no idea where she was. Mind if I call you Jack? Robbins asked. Of course, that's fine, I replied. Is the divorce amicable, or is there tension between you two? I thought for a moment. You could say it's not going smoothly. She's contesting the grounds I'm filing under. And what grounds are those? Robbins asked. Infidelity. We have a prenuptial agreement, and if the divorce is filed under those terms, her settlement will be much smaller. That's what she's fighting. Robbins exchanged a glance with Carter before asking, Do you think that could give her a motive to hurt you? I don't believe she would do something like that, I answered firmly. I just don't. Robbins didn't argue, but made a note. We'll check into it just to cover all bases. Is there anyone else who might want to damage you? Any business conflicts, disputes with neighbors, or issues with family? I shook my head. No, nothing that comes to mind. Okay, Jack. When you're feeling up to it, we'll need to do a full inventory of what's missing. I do have a couple of specific questions. Did you keep any cash in the house, especially in that strongbox? And if so, how much? Also, was there anything else of significant value, like jewelry or artwork? Yes, I said. There was some cash in the strongbox, probably around $8,000. I usually keep about $10,000, but I had spent some recently, so it was a little less. As for jewelry, there were a few pieces worth over $1,000, but I can't think of anything else with significant value. I hesitated before adding, I didn't mention this earlier, but I have a hidden safe behind the bookcase. I'm pretty sure it wasn't found, and I'd prefer to keep it that way if possible. Robbins raised an eyebrow, but didn't push the issue. Fair enough. If you think of anything else, let us know. When you're ready to return home, give us a call and we'll help you take stock of everything. Over the next few days, I slowly got better. I had plenty of time to rest, and when I was awake, I talked with Susan. I had a few visitors, Wally, Amber, David, and Sam. Kelly and her family, except for Amber, didn't come, which made sense given the situation, but I would have appreciated it. Richard, Kelly's lawyer and my old friend, did visit, and I was glad to see him. Everyone who stopped by showed concern and wished me well. Amber and Sam left with tears in their eyes, each giving me a kiss on the cheek. Those 4 days were tough. I slept a lot but had nightmares that left me waking up in a panic, sometimes screaming without remembering the dream. Susan was always there to calm me with kind words and a gentle touch. I later found out she stayed at the hospital even when she wasn't working. She said my situation reminded her of her own marriage, and she felt the need to support me. While I appreciated her kindness, my life was too chaotic to consider a deeper relationship, though I said I'd like to stay in touch. When it was time for my discharge, Dr. Julius let me know, and I was relieved to finally go home. Susan helped me pack up and wheeled me out to the lobby where Wally and Amber were waiting. She gave me a big hug, and I could tell she really cared, but I wasn't in a place to think about more than friendship. At home, I was greeted by the mess left behind. Wally and Amber offered to help, but I wanted to go through everything myself first. I promised to call them when I was ready for their help, and they agreed reluctantly. The first thing I did was check the safe behind the bookcase. Everything was still there: cash, certificates, stocks, bonds, and the DVD of Kelly's affair. My laptop and a few Terry Redland prints were gone, but not much else. Some bank and credit card statements had been moved, so I called the banks to warn them my account numbers might have been compromised. Weeks went by, but the robbery investigation moved slowly. Detectives Robbins and Carter kept me updated, but there were no leads since nothing high value had been taken. It was turning into a cold case. They had asked about Kelly, but I insisted she wouldn't have injured me, as she would have received many of the items in the divorce anyway. They seemed to agree and didn't pursue it further. I opened new bank accounts and ordered new checks for safety, though no suspicious activity had been reported. I also bought a new laptop and reorganized my office. Then, one day, while sorting through bills, I saw a statement from Reds Inc., which stood for Remote Electronic Data Storage Solutions. I had video surveillance of my property that was backed up to Reds each night. I hadn't deleted anything from the day of the robbery, so I logged into Reds, found the footage from that day, and downloaded it to my laptop. If the quality was good enough, I planned to give it to the detectives to possibly reopen the investigation and find some answers. As I reviewed the footage, I realized there was nothing useful to give the detectives. I knew then the crime would never be solved. After paying my bills, I started focusing on how to move forward. I reached out to an old college friend who worked at Cargill, one of the biggest grain merchandisers in the U.S., and through him, I arranged a meeting with their acquisition team. It's amazing what connections can do. Within 2 weeks, I had a plan in place with Cargill. I took a brief trip to Las Vegas after handling some business in Phoenix, gambled for a couple of days, then flew home to put my plans into action. I had David arrange a meeting with Gentry Grain where I talked to Kelly, her brothers Tom and Carl, and her sister Amber. David mentioned that with our impending divorce, the grain reserves wouldn't meet state requirements without my share. They quickly agreed to meet, likely because they hadn't thought about the impact of losing my stored grain. At the meeting, I greeted everyone and got straight to the point. I told them to listen before commenting and made it clear that resolving the divorce was my priority. I handed Kelly the final draft of the papers and asked her to sign them. Kelly responded, "Jack, I don't want a divorce. Whatever you think I did isn't worth ending everything we had. Can't we work through this? I don't want to do this in front of my family." I told her firmly, "Kelly, this ends today. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can move on." She grew angry and said, "If you're divorcing me, I'll fight the infidelity claim. That's the least you can do for me." I expected this. I placed a DVD on the table with the divorce papers and said, "If you fight me on this, I'll use this as evidence in court. It's a video of all 8 times you cheated on me at the spa." Amber was shocked and furious, exclaiming, "You didn't, Kelly. How could you?" I confirmed it, detailing each incident with Mario and Steve. "So yes, 8 videos. Sign the divorce papers now, or this goes to court. I'm done playing games." Tom and Carl were stunned, while Amber quietly cried as Kelly signed the divorce papers. I took my copies and put them in my briefcase. Kelly looked shocked, with unshed tears, likely realizing I had solid evidence of her infidelity. But I wasn't done yet. "Now, let's discuss the grain issue. With this divorce, you'll lose the value of my stored grain, putting you in violation of your grain license and loan covenants. The bad news? You're in trouble. The good news? I spoke to your father, and he sold me his 52% share of the business since your agreement didn't have a first right of refusal clause. Richard didn't do his best work for you. I didn't even have to show him the proof of your cheating. He believed me and knew the company would struggle without my grain. So now I'm the majority shareholder. You each own 12%, and I've already negotiated a deal to sell my stake to Cargill. You can sell your shares for the same price, and I recommend you do so. Cargill will now evaluate the staff, but I secured each of you a 1-year job guarantee. Make the most of it." The shock turned to anger, and Tom, the eldest, finally spoke up. "What have you done, Jack? You ruined the family business because my sister cheated on you. How did you trick my father into selling?" I replied, "Your father sold his stock to keep you, Carl and Kelly, out of jail. You ask what kind of man I am. Ask yourselves what kind of people you are." I tossed a second DVD onto the table. "This shows you and Carl knocking me that night and stealing from my house. Be glad I chose this path instead of giving this to the police." Kelly finally spoke. "Jack, how could you do this to me?" "Kelly, you've wasted my life. Your father and brothers always treated me like I wasn't good enough. And you've always been deceitful. You cheated on me with Larry Evandale, disrespected our marriage, and worst of all, you almost eliminated me in the attack. Tom and Carl broke my ribs, but it was your kicks that drove a broken rib into my lung. If the paramedics hadn't arrived in time, I would have died. Some best friend, huh?" Kelly fainted, and Amber and Carl rushed to catch her. Once she regained consciousness, I delivered my final words. Your father sold me his stock to keep you out of jail. He's not proud of his children, except for Amber. I've wasted enough time on you, Kelly. I won't waste any more. Have a nice life. With that, I left. The deals were done, I was free, and Kelly and I divorced. A few months later, the siblings were arrested for attack after the video was sent to the police. Kelly's father was furious and came to confront me, but he had a stroke before I could respond. Karma works in strange ways.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Before we start today's story, please let us know your location in the comment section and don't forget to like and subscribe. The engine of my truck roared as I pulled into the driveway, the weight of 30 years behind the wheel pressing on me like a second skin. I'd come home early before, but this time felt different. There was no text, no phone call to let Emily know I was on my way. I wanted to see my family as they truly were, not the polished version they put on when they knew I was coming. What I didn't expect was the blaring music from the house. One of the songs Emily used to love back when we were in our 20s. My boots hit the steps as I moved closer, catching glimpses of shadows through the curtains. When I opened the door, I found Emily standing in the living room, her back to me, wearing something I'd never expect on our anniversary. Her hair was done, her makeup flawless, but it wasn't for me. My brother Tyler stood across from her, holding a beer, grinning like he owned the place. "What's this?" I said, my voice slicing through the air like a blade. Both of them froze. Tyler looked at me like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar, and Emily turned slowly, her face tight with barely concealed annoyance. "You're early," she said, as though that were the issue. "I am? Clearly, that's a problem." My eyes darted between them, catching the way Emily subtly adjusted her tank top and the way Tyler avoided my gaze. "It's not what it looks like," Emily said, crossing her arms. The words stung, but it was the flicker of panic in her eyes that told me I'd walked in on something I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't respond, my mind racing. The years spent on the road, the nights away from home, and Tyler always stepping in to help. It suddenly all seemed too convenient, too well-timed. Something inside me cracked, but I swallowed it down. "Is that what you'd say to the boys if they walked in right now?" I asked quietly. Her eyes widened, and Tyler stepped forward, his hands up like I was about to swing at him. "Hey, let's not make this a thing, man," he said. "It's not." I snapped coldly, my voice final. Tyler stepped back. Emily looked at me, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. In that silence, I felt the first real fracture of trust, a splintering I knew I couldn't ignore. And in that moment, I decided I wouldn't. The following morning, I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Emily acted like nothing had happened, humming as she made breakfast, while Tyler was nowhere to be seen. The boys, Jason and Caleb, chattered away at the table, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. I sat there, picking at my food, replaying the scene from the night before. The way Emily had been dressed, Tyler's smirk, the way they froze when I walked in. I needed answers, but I wasn't going to tip my hand just yet. After breakfast, I went to the truck stop, hoping to clear my head. That's when I saw it again, the ad for the DNA test. This time, it didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a sign. By the end of the week, the test kits arrived. I told Emily I'd gotten them as part of a school project for Jason and Caleb, a way for them to learn about their ancestry. She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. I swabbed their cheeks myself, my hands steady even though my heart felt like it might burst. The waiting nearly killed me. I stayed out late in the truck, claiming I was preparing for another haul, but really, I couldn't stand being in the same house as her. Every time I saw Emily, every time she smiled at me, it felt like a lie. The results came 2 weeks later. I opened the email while sitting in my truck, parked at the edge of a gas station lot. My eyes scanned the screen. Once, twice, 3 times, before I slammed my fist into the dashboard so hard that the glove compartment popped open. Not a match. Neither Jason nor Caleb shared my DNA. I sat there, my chest heaving as the betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. All those years of working myself to the bone for my family, missing moments with the boys, and to find out they weren't even mine. It was crushing. I drove home in a daze, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, Tyler's car was there again, and my heart raced as I stepped inside. There he was, sitting at the kitchen table with Emily, laughing like everything was normal. "You've got some nerve," I said, my voice low but heavy with menace. Tyler's smile faltered when he saw the look on my face. Emily's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. What are you talking about? She snapped. I pulled out my phone and held up the DNA results for her to see. Care to explain this? Her eyes flicked to the screen, and for a split second, I saw it, a crack in her armor. But then she scoffed, rolling her eyes. Are you serious right now? You're really going to bring this up in front of Tyler? Well, he's part of this, isn't he? I turned to my brother, who looked like he wanted to disappear. Go ahead, Tyler. Tell me the truth. How long have you been screwing my wife? Emily gasped, but Tyler raised his hands defensively. Oh man, that's not what's happening here. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Blowing this out of proportion? I barked out a bitter laugh. Neither of my sons are mine, and you're telling me I'm overreacting? Emily stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. Don't you dare make this about Tyler. You were never here. I raised those boys on my own while you were out playing trucker hero. Maybe if you'd been around more, you wouldn't have to ask stupid questions like this. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. So it's true. Tyler's their father? Her silence spoke volumes. Tyler tried to say something, but I cut him off, my voice shaking with rage. Get out of my house. Both of you. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but I pointed to the door. Or I'll make you regret staying. They left, Emily dragging Tyler by the arm as their car pulled away. I stood in the doorway, staring at the spot where they had been, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence in the house after they left was deafening. The boys were upstairs, oblivious to the chaos downstairs. I sat in the dim kitchen, the DNA results still open on my phone, the words searing into my brain. No match. My hands trembled as I poured myself a drink, but the whiskey didn't dull the sharp edge of betrayal cutting through me. I couldn't stop replaying everything. The years of absence, how Emily always seemed to have Tyler on speed dial whenever I wasn't around. I thought I was providing for my family, but now I knew Tyler had been filling the void I left behind. The next few days were a blur. Emily stayed with Tyler, taking the boys with her. She said it was for the best, claiming I was too angry to be around them. That part wasn't a lie. I was furious, so angry it felt like it could burn me alive. But it wasn't just about Emily or even Tyler. It was about everything I'd sacrificed, every moment I'd missed, only to find out it had all been for nothing. I needed clarity, so I went to my lawyer, Dan. He was the no-nonsense type, the kind who told you the truth even when you didn't want to hear it. I laid everything out for him. The DNA results, the years of lies, and the fact that Tyler was their biological father. Dan sighed, rubbing his temples. This isn't going to be easy, he said. Legally, you're still their father, but if Tyler pushes for parental rights, especially now that the DNA proves his paternity, the court might side with him. And Emily? I asked, my voice tight. She'll back him, Dan said flatly. She wants out, and Tyler gives her the easiest path. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, but Dan wasn't finished. Listen, he said, leaning forward. We can fight this, but it's going to get ugly. And even if we win, you're looking at years of tension and a mess that could ruin you financially. You need to decide what's worth fighting for. That night, I sat in my truck, staring out at the dark highway stretching ahead of me. I'd spent my life solving problems with hard work and determination, but this wasn't a problem I could solve that way. This was personal. And that's when the idea hit me. A cold, calculated plan forming in the back of my mind. If the court wasn't going to deliver justice, I'd take matters into my own hands. But it couldn't be reckless. It had to be calculated, undeniable, and above all, untraceable. I began plotting, using every spare moment between hauls to gather the pieces I needed. I made calls, dug into Tyler's finances, and uncovered everything I could. What I found made my blood boil. Tyler and Emily had been planning this for years. Tyler had put his name on their bank accounts, secured a home for them, and even started pushing for full custody of the boys. On the day of the custody hearing, I walked into that courtroom with determination, my resolve as hard as steel. Tyler and Emily were sitting side by side, grinning like they were already victorious. The boys were under the care of a court-appointed advocate, unaware of the battle being fought over their future. When the judge ruled in Tyler's favor, granting him partial custody and the right to be listed as the boy's legal father, I didn't show any emotion. No outbursts, no argument. I simply nodded and walked out. They thought they'd won, but they had no idea that I'd already set the wheels of my revenge in motion. In the days that followed, I kept my head down. I knew that any sudden move or emotional outburst would give them ammunition to use against me. Let them think they had broken me. In truth, I was more focused than ever. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place, and I just had to wait for the right moment. After the hearing, Tyler had the nerve to approach me in the parking lot, putting on his best concerned brother act, like we were still family. "Look, man," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I didn't mean for things to get this far, but the boys deserve stability. And Emily, well, she deserves someone who can be there for her." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. His smug tone, the way he acted like I had handed him my family, it made my skin crawl. But I just nodded, my voice steady. "You're right," I said. "They deserve the best." His grin widened, clearly thinking he had me. The next few weeks were eerily quiet. Emily and Tyler moved into a new house, a lavish place on the outskirts of town. Far too grand for Tyler, whose lifestyle had been supported by my hard work for years. I began making routine visits to places Tyler frequented, the bar he liked, the mechanic shop where he had his car serviced. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was gathering intel, piecing together his habits. Tyler was predictable, lazy even. He stuck to the same routines, never straying from the patterns I had already learned. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances, just a man doing his job, rebuilding his life. But in the back of my mind, my plan was steadily taking shape. One night, after a long haul, I stopped at a diner on the outskirts of town. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard two guys at the counter talking about a logging truck that had plowed through a fence on private property. The owner had been blamed for the damage because the fence wasn't properly marked. That conversation sparked something in me. What if something similar could happen to Tyler? Something big enough to send a message, but not so reckless that it would point back to me? I refined my plan, making it airtight. The timing had to be perfect. Emily and Tyler were hosting a housewarming party, their new life on display for all to see. It was the perfect backdrop for what I was about to do. That night, I parked my truck a few miles down the road and waited. I had studied every detail of their property, the incline of the driveway, the weak spots in the landscaping, the positioning of the house near a wooded area. As the music and laughter spilled out of the house, I revved the engine. My heart raced. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my pride, everything they had stolen from me. Then I hit the gas. The truck surged forward, headlights cutting through the darkness. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, every muscle in my body focused. This wasn't just a man driving a truck. It was a storm, years of betrayal and pain building to this single moment. The closer I got to their house, the more I could feel it. The louder the music grew, the more the chatter of their guests became faintly audible, even over the rumbling engine. It was almost fitting. Emily and Tyler inside, basking in the illusion of their stolen happiness, completely unaware of what was coming. As I neared the driveway, I slowed down, just enough to time it perfectly. A large SUV was parked across the street, blocking any clear view from the house. The property was surrounded by trees, and the driveway curved gently uphill before opening to the front yard. Everything about this moment felt inevitable, like it had been building for years. I slammed on the gas. The truck roared as it tore through the wooden gate, tires ripping up gravel. Guests screamed as the truck sped toward the house, the massive front windows reflecting my headlights. Tyler appeared in the doorway, his face frozen in shock and terror. At the last second, I swerved, avoiding a direct hit on the house, and instead plowed through the landscaped front yard. The truck screeched to a halt, the bumper just inches from the porch steps. The impact shook the ground, knocking over a set of garden lights and sending sparks flying into the air. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. I stepped out of the truck, the crunch of my boots on the ruined gravel sounding too loud. Tyler stumbled backward, tripping over the threshold, as Emily appeared behind him, her face twisted with a mix of fury and fear. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she screamed, her voice breaking. Tyler tried to shield her, raising his hands. "You've lost your mind, man." "Maybe I have," I said, my voice calm, eerily controlled. I walked up to the truck, placing a hand on the hood as I stared at them. "But you took everything from me, so now we're even." Emily's face drained of color. "This isn't over, you psycho. We'll have you arrested," she yelled. I tilted my head, cutting her off. "For what? An accident?" I gestured to the truck. "I'm just a tired trucker who lost control on a bad turn. It happens, doesn't it?" Tyler's jaw clenched as his eyes flickered to the gathering crowd of stunned guests on the lawn. No one said a word. No one dared. I turned back to Emily, leaning in close enough to see the panic in her eyes. "This is what it feels like to have your life shattered, Emily. You can't fix this with lies or lawyers." I climbed back into the truck, the engine rumbling as I reversed out of the wreckage. As I glanced back at the house, at the broken yard, the shattered confidence on their faces, I realized it wasn't everything I had lost, but it was a start. Driving away into the night, I knew something for certain. They would never look at me the same way again. For the first time, I wasn't the man who sacrificed for them. I was the man who made them pay. The night after the incident, I parked my truck in its usual spot at the depot, wiping dirt and sweat from my hands. I had driven straight to my company's garage, where the minimal damage to the truck, thanks to my careful planning, was chalked up to a mishap during a late-night delivery. No questions asked. That's the beauty of a reputation built on reliability. People trust you even when they shouldn't. But the aftermath of my revenge wasn't as simple as leaving the wreckage behind. By the time I got home, my phone was blowing up with messages, frantic voicemails from Emily, Tyler's weak attempts to sound intimidating, and even a few calls from the sheriff's office. It didn't matter. I had covered my tracks too well for them to pin anything on me. The next day, I woke up to the sight of two sheriff's deputies standing at my front door. Their presence didn't shake me. I was ready for this. "Are you Roy Walker?" one of them asked, his tone brisk. "That's me," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "We've got some questions about an incident at your brother's place last night," one of the deputies said. "Witnesses reported seeing your truck on the property." I scratched my chin, feigning confusion. "Yeah, about that," I replied, putting on an innocent tone. "I was headed home from a run and must have missed a turn. The roads out there are pretty rough, you know." I stopped to check my GPS, but when I saw all those people, I realized I'd made a mistake and just got out of there. The deputies exchanged a look, their skepticism barely hidden. "Mind if we take a look at your truck?" the other one asked. "Go ahead," I said, stepping aside. They spent the next 20 minutes inspecting every inch of the vehicle. I'd made sure there was nothing incriminating, no debris, no visible damage, nothing that could link me to the destruction at Tyler's place. When they finally left, I exhaled slowly. I'd won the first round. The real victory came later that afternoon when I got a call from Dan. "I've got news," he said, his voice clipped. "The court's reviewing Tyler's custody agreement. Your little stunt rattled them enough to look into his finances and Emily's situation. Turns out Tyler's been hiding some debt, and Emily's job history isn't stable enough to guarantee a good home for the boys." I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of my plan falling into place. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means the court might reconsider you as the boy's legal father," Dan said. "But you've got to play it straight from here on out. No more accidents." I smirked, knowing full well I had already achieved my goal. By the end of the week, Emily and Tyler were scrambling to fix the damage, not just to their yard, but to their perfect little facade. Meanwhile, I went about my life, focused and calculated. The world thought I was moving on, but in reality, I was just waiting for the next crack in their armor to show. The beauty of revenge wasn't just in the act. It was in watching the ripple effect, knowing that every move I made sent their world spiraling. The fallout from the night at Tyler's house spread quickly. Small-town gossip moves fast, and by the next morning, everyone knew about the accident. People whispered about how a truck had nearly flattened Tyler's perfect suburban dream. Though no one outright said it, they all knew it was me. Emily's lawyer filed for a restraining order, citing the incident as proof that I was a danger to her and the boys. I had expected that move. What they didn't expect was that I had already prepared my counterstrike. When the court hearing for the restraining order arrived, I walked in with my lawyer, Dan, carrying a thick folder of evidence. Emily sat across from us, flanked by Tyler, both of them looking smug, certain they had me cornered. The judge opened with the accusations against me. Reckless behavior, endangering my family, showing up unannounced. When it was my turn to speak, Dan stood and calmly placed the folder on the judge's bench. "These are financial records for Mr. Tyler Walker," Dan began, his voice steady. "They show a consistent pattern of unpaid debts, fraudulent loans, and a failed business venture that nearly left him bankrupt last year." Tyler's face drained of color. Dan continued, "And here are messages between Emily Walker and Tyler spanning over a decade. They suggest an ongoing affair during the marriage, as well as their plans to manipulate custody proceedings in their favor." Emily shot to her feet, her voice trembling with outrage. "That's a lie," she shouted. The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down, Mrs. Walker." I stayed silent, letting Dan handle everything. He painted a clear picture. Emily and Tyler weren't the responsible parents they claimed to be. They were reckless, deceitful, and unfit to have custody of Jason and Caleb. By the end of the hearing, the judge didn't grant the restraining order. Instead, he ordered a deeper investigation into Tyler's finances and Emily's living situation. As we left the courtroom, Emily shot me a glare that could have melted steel. Tyler tried to keep his head down, but I caught the look of pure rage burning beneath the surface. "Enjoy the spotlight," I told them as I walked past. "It's not over yet." Even as I played the part of the calm, collected man reclaiming his dignity, my real plan was still in motion. Late one night, parked at a rest stop miles from town, I made a call to an old friend, a man who specialized in fixing problems the law couldn't touch. "I need information," I said, keeping my voice low. I needed airtight proof on Tyler Walker, something that would leave no room for doubt. Over the next few weeks, I gathered the pieces of the puzzle. Tyler had a gambling addiction, borrowing money from some dangerous individuals, and his debts were quickly catching up with him. More importantly, he had been using funds from Emily's accounts to cover his tracks, all without her knowledge. When the full picture came together, it wasn't just a scandal. It was a ticking time bomb. All I had to do was light the fuse, and I knew exactly when to strike. The custody review hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. By then, I would have everything I needed to make sure Emily and Tyler's perfect little world came crashing down. Until then, I kept driving, kept waiting, and kept the fire inside me burning. This was no longer just revenge, it was justice. As the custody review hearing approached, every day felt like the noose was tightening around Tyler and Emily, not me. The information I had gathered was a loaded gun, and I was about to aim it squarely at the heart of their lies. In the weeks following the courtroom drama, Tyler started to unravel. Word about his gambling debt spread, thanks to a few anonymous tips I made to the right people. Suddenly, the whispers around town shifted focus. They were no longer about me, but about Tyler's shady dealings. Emily, of course, had no idea what was really happening. She probably thought life was just throwing her one curveball after another. What she didn't know was that each curveball had my fingerprints all over it. I made sure to stay visible in town, keeping up appearances, smiling at neighbors, and even volunteering to coach Caleb's little league team when another dad dropped out. The kids didn't know anything about the custody battle or the DNA test. So to them, I was still their dad, and I planned to keep it that way. But Emily was on edge. She tried to confront me once outside a grocery store, her face flushed with anger. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed. I didn't take the bait. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Emily. Everything I've done has been for the boys." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't over. You don't win." "We'll see," I said, walking away. The night before the custody hearing, I received the final piece of the puzzle. My friend on the road had outdone himself. He handed me bank transfer records, loan agreements, and even an email thread where Tyler admitted to falsifying his income to secure a loan for the house he and Emily were living in. The documents were airtight, undeniable, and devastating. I walked into the hearing the next morning with quiet confidence. Tyler and Emily sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, their lawyer trying to look composed, but failing miserably. When it was my turn to present my case, I handed the judge a thick stack of evidence. "Your Honor," my lawyer began, "we have reason to believe that Mr. Tyler Walker and Mrs. Emily Walker are not only unfit to share custody, but have also actively endangered the children's financial and emotional well-being through deceit and mismanagement." The room fell silent as the judge flipped through the pages. The tension was palpable, and I could see Tyler squirming in his seat, sweat beading on his forehead. When the judge finally looked up, his expression was cold. "This is troubling, to say the least," he said. Tyler stammered. "That's not what it looks like. I can explain." The judge cut him off. "You'll have a chance to explain during the investigation. For now, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order against Mr. Walker, and custody of the children will remain with their legal father, Roy Walker, until further notice." Emily's gasp filled the room as Tyler buried his face in his hands, but I wasn't celebrating yet. I knew this wasn't over. As I left the courtroom, I could feel Emily's glare burning into my back. She wasn't going to give up easily, and neither was Tyler. That was fine. I still had one final move to make, the kind they'd never see coming. The days leading up to the custody review hearing passed with quiet intensity. Tyler and Emily retreated, licking their wounds, but I knew better than to think they were finished. They'd lost the latest battle, but the war wasn't over. Then, on a late Friday night, the call came in. An old friend from the trucking depot, who knew about my situation, passed on a chilling tip. Tyler and Emily were planning to use the boys as leverage in one last desperate attempt to destroy me. The details were vague, But it was clear they were desperate, and desperate people made dangerous moves. Sitting in the cab of my truck, I stared at the phone, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't going to let them win, not after everything. The pieces of my plan were already in place. I'd spent weeks preparing, making sure that what I was about to do would leave no trail back to me. This wasn't an impulse. It was the culmination of months of betrayal, calculation, and resolve. I made one last call to Dan, my lawyer, to confirm that the custody case was still in my favor and that there was no way they could legally regain control of the boys. Then, I pulled up a map of Tyler's property, marking every angle, every point of approach. By the time I arrived at their house, the night was quiet. Their lights were still on, and I could hear muffled laughter from inside. They were celebrating something, probably another scheme. I parked my truck a safe distance away and double-checked everything. The trajectory, the speed, the structural weaknesses I'd scoped out during earlier reconnaissance drives. If done right, it would look like a tragic accident, one that would leave them shaken but unscathed, while making it clear they were no longer untouchable. The plan wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message they'd never forget. I eased the truck into gear, my heart pounding, but my mind calm. Every turn of the wheel, every second ticking by, felt like stepping further into a moment I couldn't undo, but I wasn't turning back. As I approached the house, I saw Tyler through the large bay window, holding a drink and laughing with Emily. That image burned into my memory, the two of them carefree, basking in the comfort of a life built on my sacrifice. I floored the accelerator, and the truck roared to life, barreling through the driveway and crashing into the front yard. Lights flickered, screams echoed from inside, and the heavy front bumper collided with the porch, shattering the wood into splinters. I hit the brakes just in time to avoid destroying the entire house. Smoke billowed from the engine as I stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel. Tyler stumbled out of the house, his face pale with shock, and Emily wasn't far behind, her voice a high-pitched scream of fury. "You're insane," she shrieked. "You'll go to jail for this." I didn't say a word. I walked slowly, deliberately, toward the edge of the property where a surveillance camera blinked silently at me. It wasn't mine. It was theirs. I made sure to turn toward it, raising my hand slightly as if to say, "Look at me. I'm unarmed. This isn't what it seems." Then, as if by sheer coincidence, I walked to the truck's cab and calmly retrieved the clipboard I had planted there earlier, filled with falsified delivery papers. The papers showed I had been making a delivery nearby and had experienced a mechanical failure with the brakes. I called 911 myself, reporting the incident as a horrible accident caused by a sudden loss of control. I made sure to sound shaken, but cooperative. When the deputies arrived, they examined the scene, my truck and the supposed mechanical failure. The house was damaged, but no one was hurt. The officers took my statement, and Tyler tried to scream about how I'd done it on purpose. "Do you have proof?" one deputy asked flatly. Tyler froze. The damage was damning, but there was no evidence, none that could link it to deliberate intent. I'd made sure of that. As the deputies let me go with nothing more than a citation for property damage, I saw the look in Emily's eyes, rage, disbelief, and something else, fear. And for the first time, I felt free. But the final act wasn't over yet. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered his final decision. Tyler and Emily sat across from me, their lawyer hunched over in defeat. Every lie, every betrayal, and every desperate ploy they had used against me had crumbled under the weight of the truth. The investigation into Tyler's depths, Emily's deceit, and their toxic manipulation painted such a damning picture that even their lawyer had stopped trying to defend them. The judge's voice was steady, but his words hit hard. Full custody of Jason and Caleb was awarded to me. Emily and Tyler were restricted to supervised visitation, pending further review. I sat back, my hands steady on the table in front of me, feeling the tension in my chest finally ease. Tyler looked like a ghost, slumped in his seat, while Emily seethed with barely contained fury, her face twisted in the realization that the life she and Tyler had carefully built was falling apart, piece by piece. As we left the courtroom, Emily made one last attempt to corner me in the hallway. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "You think you've won, but you've only delayed the inevitable." I looked her dead in the eye, my voice calm and steady. "It's over for you. The boys will never see the kind of people you and Tyler have become. That's my promise." She stood there, speechless, as I turned and walked away. Jason and Caleb were waiting for me at the other end of the hallway, with my lawyer just outside. The air was crisp, the cool breeze a reminder that it was time for a fresh start. The boys were quiet on the drive home, but as we pulled into the driveway, Jason spoke up. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "are we going to be okay now?" I nodded, my grip on the steering wheel firm but gentle. "We're going to be better than okay, son. I promise." That night, after putting them to bed, I sat alone on the porch with a glass of whiskey, staring at the stars. The road that had brought me here had been brutal, filled with betrayal, loss, and anger. But in the end, I had reclaimed what mattered most. For men like me, who've given everything to their families, often at the cost of their own happiness, there's a lesson in all of this. The world won't always give you justice, not unless you fight for it with everything you've got. But there's a line you can't cross, even in revenge. I had towed that line, came close to losing myself, but in the end, I found something far more important. My pride, my integrity, and the love of my sons. As the night stretched on, I realized the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine now, and for the first time in years, I was driving towards something worth fighting for. I took a long sip, the whiskey burning smooth, and whispered to the stars, "Here's to moving forward." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
My cheating wife tried to baby trap me with another man's child, but I caught her and took control. I'm 47 and my wife is 45. We've been married for 22 years and we have 3 kids, a 20-year-old son and 2 daughters, 18 and 16. On September 11, 2001, my wife planned to meet a man she met online at a nearby hotel. They had been texting and exchanging pictures for months. At that time, we had been married for 2 years and our son was not even a year old. Surprisingly, the only thing that stopped her was the Trade Center attack. Her uncle was on the 84th floor of the South Tower, and it was almost certain he died on impact. The entire country was mourning, and she took it hard. I sympathized with her and was there to console her. After some crying, she confessed her plan, expressed regret, and showed me proof that they hadn't gone beyond emotional conversations. Before the confession, I had a gut feeling something was wrong, but I never thought she would have an emotional affair. This shocked me because I thought she wasn't that type of person. Having grown up in a sheltered environment, she confessed that she regretted her actions and changed her mind. She apologized and showed me proof that things hadn't progressed beyond an emotional connection. Before the confession, I suspected something, but I had no idea it was an emotional affair. It was shocking because I believed she wasn't that kind of person. She grew up in a sheltered environment, not allowed to party, drink, or go on dates, and she felt like she missed out. When we started our relationship, she told me I was her first, and I believed her. However, after her confession on September 9th, I wasn't so sure. If she would go this far, what else was she hiding? If not for Osama bin Laden, she might have gone through with it, and I would never have known. The fact that she came clean without me finding out contributed to my willingness to reconcile with the condition of her getting counseling. Additionally, I saw no proof of a physical affair. I remembered how the entire experience crushed me. Despite canceling the plan, she was remorseful and did the right things. It took a long time, but eventually the pain faded into a memory. Trust, however, is like a clean sheet of paper. When damaged, it becomes deformed. With infidelity, it's like crumpling it into a ball. You can smooth it out, but it will never be as pure as new. Trust became a personal issue for me. Even as I got comfortable with the reconciliation, I still had to check on my own, just to be sure. She passed those checks, smoothing things out somewhat, but it was never perfect again. Then, 19 years later, on October 14, 2019, with 2 more beautiful children, I had a gut feeling. I hate having gut feelings. One Monday morning, she had an argument with our 18-year-old daughter. Later that day, I made my daughter laugh, but my wife, still upset, left the house. She turned off her location sharing, raising my suspicions. The trust that had never fully restored needed reassurance, so I kept trying to check her phone, computer, and anything else that might be helpful. The next day, we had to get a passport for our youngest at the post office. She was aloof, constantly on her phone, and I made a mental note to check it out later. Usually she left her phone around, but lately she carried it everywhere, another unsettling feeling. We bought her an iPad, and she locked it with a passcode, which surprised me. We don't usually use passcodes, and although she explained it was for work, doubts remained. On Friday, we closed on a home equity loan at the bank, and she said she had to run an errand. Checking her check-ins, I found out one stop was at an adult store. I looked for items when I had the chance and found a nice piece of lingerie. Our bed life had been stagnant due to her lack of interest, prompting her to look for information on female desire issues. Curiosity led me to monitor what I could. Finally, I got the passcode to her iPad and discovered explicit Facebook messages with a guy. Even though they weren't friends on Facebook, she responded as if she knew him. The conversation turned explicit, and when he suggested she drop her daughter off and come over, she declined, saying, "My stories aren't set up like that." Instead of holding on to this information and its source to get a clearer picture, I ended up confronting her that evening, which was a big mistake. It was too soon because she lied and took the affair underground. She said the lingerie was for us, claiming she was building up the courage to wear it for me. She also said the guy on Facebook was a summer coworker who started messaging her out of the blue. She swore there was no physical contact, just texting. I want to believe that, but it's hard for me. I insisted it had to end completely, and she agreed immediately. The next day, I asked if it ended, and she said yes. Unbeknownst to her, I could see their messages through other means. She lied. Now, after 19 years, it's happening again. My emotions are a mess. I can't eat or sleep and have a hard time concentrating. I'm starting counseling this week and hitting the gym more. This situation sucks, and I don't want to go through it. I've been reading the 180 almost daily since D-Day. I pulled it off well for a couple of days, but today was rough. I got almost no sleep last night. Our son, who works at a local theater, gave us tickets to come from away. We had to pretend everything was great to not disappoint him. At 20, he's a great kid. If you're not familiar with the show, it deals with the Trade Center story, and it was tough. I've kept a journal, observing dates, times, and my thoughts. I've come up with a mantra: keep cool, keep patient, keep control. I need to be more consistent, but it's something I've been trying to get to. I've gotten into a better headspace. Now, we have to go shopping tonight, and I want to practice the 180 as best as I can. Fast forward to July 3rd, 2021. My investigation revealed her contact with other men through the summer school program where she works as a teacher's aide. He's the gym teacher. Affair partner is 32 years old. The wayward wife is 47, making her a cougar, I guess. The affair partner is a gym teacher at a nearby school, and his wife works at a different school, not even in the same district. The wayward wife met him while they were working at summer school. Summer school here is run in a few districts, so teachers from different districts work together. I found out he would be there again, observed quietly, and caught a suggestive Facebook message. He rejected her, which made me chuckle. I've actually come to believe he sees her as a friend and doesn't want to get involved. She's 47, about 15 years older than him. I'm not completely done yet, but I can see it from here. Given the magnitude of the life change, I need to know. I'm setting up my Intel network, voice-activated recorder, GPS, electronic passcode, and so on. I want as close to incontrovertible proof as I can have before I pull the trigger. I've also been reading up on and taking notes on divorce laws in my state. I will be contacting lawyers as well. I have a few friends who have been recently divorced, and I will be hitting them up for any advice too. Then I conspicuously collected some DNA samples from my 3 children to make sure that they are mine, just for peace of mind. By far the hardest thing that I've ever done. Regardless of the results, I will love them unconditionally. As for what I'm waiting for, well, I go from thinking we're done to maybe often enough that I know I have to have it break me in the face hard enough, and it hasn't yet. I also feel like I don't want to put my kids through it, even though they are older, unless it's pretty cut and dry. There is a part of me that ghoulishly enjoys hearing her on the voice-activated recorder complain about the latest development. He unfriended a lot of people in the last days or two. Yes, I snooped there too, and she's not too happy about it. I know this isn't going to go over well, but she's been going through what I call a midlife crisis over the last year or so. She also lost her mom back in November, and we are having the funeral tomorrow. She's also taking it very hard. 2 days after her mom passed, we lost my dad. Over the next 3 weeks, she lost 2 more relatives. Then it was Christmas. My family has faced a lot of tragedy recently, and I see it's deeply affecting her. In the back of my mind, I thought maybe this is a result of those events. Perhaps I should create more space between our losses and the potential pain of divorce. I'm willing to endure it a bit longer for my kids and family. Holding out before making that decision is tough. After 26 years together, giving up isn't easy, especially considering the depth of love I felt for her throughout most of our marriage. I can't argue with that. My plan is to spend this week checking out divorce attorneys. We have a birthday party for my daughter next Sunday, and after that, I plan to confront her. I don't know exactly what I'll say, but I'll let her know I've consulted an attorney and I'm ready to press the divorce button. While I'd love for her to have a realization moment, I won't continue the marriage after collecting evidence of her affair. On February 11th, 2022, I installed a voice-activated recorder in her car. Listening to the recording made me note the effects I'd feel and how to deal with them. Sleeplessness, use PM and melatonin, nervous energy, hit the gym, lack of appetite, knock off those extra pounds, difficulty concentrating, write everything down and recite common tasks. I forgot about night sweats until they happened, then prepared with towels and fresh clothes. Relief followed, knowing no more spying or walking on eggshells. Before I actually told her, I knew she was treating me like things were wonderful in our lives for the last few months. She was upset over receiving a box of her late mother's things from her dad to sort out. It didn't affect me. I felt no sympathy, grief, or sorrow at seeing her upset. When the confrontation finally occurred after her prodding and pushing, "What's wrong? Tell me what's bothering you," all I did was say his name and the words, "I know." She got flustered and stormed out of the house. I don't have to worry about her anymore. I don't have to feel on edge when she's around, as if I had to act a certain way or make sure I accomplished certain tasks. As for the recent developments with her, something seemed off. We were getting along a little too well. She was almost too nice to me. Things that would normally annoy her suddenly didn't. At first, I thought she was finally happy, but eventually, it nagged at me, and I decided to become the marriage police. I installed a voice-activated recorder in her car and got the GPS in there again. I went fishing, and I caught something on my first cast. The recording contained 2 phone calls. The first was of him as she was driving out to meet him. They ended up in a church parking lot really for about 40 minutes. She went to his car, so I was spared having to listen to that. The next call was to her sounding board friend, who lives halfway across the country. If the call to him wasn't enough, and I have no doubt I could have found wiggle room in that if I really wanted to keep my blinders on, then the call to her sealed the deal. The conversation that eventually happened between us was a familiar story here, primarily gaslighting and blame shifting. Apparently, her affair was my fault because she resents things she never got to do in her life. She didn't go to college or have a wild single life before we got married. And of course, it's my fault, and she resented me for it. I told her I refused to accept her idea that her affair was my fault, and I had told her a while ago that if she wanted out, then let's end it, and she chose to stay. So no, this is all about her. I will accept some responsibility for not being the perfect husband, but I certainly wasn't married to the perfect wife. I certainly didn't deserve this. So I'm calling a few divorce friends for attorney recommendations and any strategic advice that they might have. I am finally ready to end it. I have finally learned my lesson. My wayward wife has shown she doesn't deserve what it takes to reconcile, and I don't want to sign up for another affair in a few months or years, so I'm joining the divorce side. Is there any secret handshake or something I should learn? I am still in the whirlwind of emotion. I broke a wall, but luckily neither the wall nor I got hurt. I yelled, "Forget her!" loudly in my house. Thankfully, no one else was home. So when my best friend called to check on me, I broke down sobbing. I daydream about a magical reconciliation for her. Would it be so bad if we stayed together? Maybe if I tried a little harder, she'd be happy. But my head knows this is nonsense, and getting a divorce is the right move. I've said it to my mom, my friends, and myself many times in the last couple of days. Since D-Day, we've mostly avoided each other, and I really miss her. We used to text during the day, share our work experiences, and have random hugs and kisses at home. All of that has stopped, and as I mentioned, we stay away from each other in the house now. She sleeps on the couch instead of the bed. One of my simple pleasures in the morning was gently waking her up when our alarm went off by rolling over, rubbing her back or arm, and whispering, "Hey honey, it's that time," which was always followed by an almost inaudible response that always brought a smile to my face. She hasn't left yet. We haven't split yet. But I know what I have to do. I just know it won't be easy. Can you please tell me there is light at the end of this long, dark, lonely tunnel? Our children had the opportunity to travel and do some pretty cool things with their involvement in this cool musical group. She's jealous and has expressed it because she never got to do any of that. Newsflash, neither did I. I'm not jealous, but I'm happy that my kids have more than I did. I've spent the last 20 years in a fairly popular local band playing at some pretty nice events. She's jealous of those opportunities, though. She dismisses the hours of practice and study it took to get in a place to be able to do this thing. Although I can tell you how many times she shared stories with me of people she met at work who heard us or followed us. It's like she feels like a big deal because she's married to one of the members. She even had to talk to someone in the doctor's office after overhearing them talking about the gig we were doing that night. She complained that I left her alone with the kids when I went out to play. Well, I was working, and I came home with money in my pocket. I did have fun. Yes, playing music in front of people is exhilarating. Shifting gears, dealing with bar owners, staying on top of timing and crowd reaction. It's work, though. Getting up at 5 a.m., working a full day, then gigging and not getting home until 2 a.m., made for a long day. Also not fun. But we needed the money because of the house she wanted to build. Leaving the group was simply not an option. She worked too, but I earned almost as much just gigging as she did at her regular job, which also made her upset. And my real job paid 3 to 4 times hers. So I worked hard to give my family the life I thought they deserved. And what I got was resentment. The old saying that when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time, is indeed true. It took me too long to see who I married. I came to the same conclusion. If we stay together, I'm signing up for not being around. I've gotten a couple of attorney references and will be setting up appointments soon. I just don't see a path that doesn't end in divorce. There's really nothing left to work with. The funny thing is, people who know her outside of the home think she's a wonderful person, warm, caring, and a terrific mom, someone who goes above and beyond to help others, and she does all that. But inside the house, it's a different story. She's definitely suffered from what I call the poor me syndrome. He's a coworker married to another coworker. I haven't told her family. All she has left is her dad and his sister. I don't really talk to them much, but I might tell him, at least, at some point. I've reached out to the other betrayed spouse, but she hasn't responded. I'll send another email in a couple of days with details, and then leave her alone if I don't hear anything back. So tonight, I told her I want a divorce. She wanted a hug and to cry, but those times are over. She understood. We talked wistfully about how we wish things were different. I asked her, "Didn't you realize that this was going to happen when you were doing it?" She did, but she's still very upset. I feel bad. I still love this woman, but I can't be with her anymore. I don't want to do this, but I have to. A few years down the road, I'll feel better knowing I'm free. The band is on hiatus at the moment, but I have a few irons in the fire to keep me playing. We play classic rock with horns, Chicago, etc. I play trumpet. I have my sights set on that day. I know I'm starting down a rough road, but I'm confident I'll come out in good shape. She left a door open for counseling, but I shut it down, although I urged her to get counseling anyway. The only thing I can blame myself for right now is not ending things earlier. I've done nothing else wrong in the last few years. On the contrary, I've tried to be the model husband and make her the most important thing in my life. And yet, here I am again. I keep wanting to keep my marriage, but then I remember why I can't. It's a sad thing, really, and as much as anything else, it shows me that I'm ready to let go. I reached out to the other betrayed spouse via email but got no response. So, at the advice from a different thread, I called her and broke it to her. I've never felt like such a mess in my life. I know I didn't do anything but tell her what she needed to know, yet she was heartbroken, and I felt responsible. It was like finding out all over again. I broke the poor woman's heart. I know I didn't, but she thanked me. That wasn't easy to do. We talked more, and I'll guide her to this site for support. It helped me greatly. I also told her that even though we've never met, I'll be there for her. She can call or text me anytime. She was helpful to me, comparing notes and making sense of the situation. Just got off the phone with her. I feel much better about telling her now. She thanked me, and I feel I did the right thing, even though it was hard. We chatted more, and I'll direct her to this site for support. It's been a great help for me. I assured her I'm here for her, even though we haven't met. She can call or text me anytime. She was helpful to me, too, comparing notes and making sense of the situation. Just finished a phone call with her, and I feel better about opening up. She thanked me, and I believe I did the right thing. It was tough, but I wanted to hear about his behavior. He seemed to create a story of an unhappy marriage to gain sympathy. I'm not ignoring her role, but she might have been manipulated with things she wanted to hear. My wife is unaware I exposed the affair partner, affecting 2 families and 6 children. Looking at a parent and wondering how they could do that is tough. Just have her compare paychecks, that's what's been happening. I only talk to her about kids or household matters. I mostly avoid being in the same room as her. The house is cold, and she's slowly realizing she's gone too far. I'm calling lawyers, gathering friends for support, and making plans to leave. I don't think she's quite out of her days yet. I'm distancing myself as much as I can. We only talk if she initiates, and it's about the house, kids, or money. Trust me, she's starting to get it. She might expect me to act like nothing happened, or to do the pick-me dance. In the past, that's what happened. I didn't really stand up to her and assert my demands to stay together. I was content to let it slide with a few apologies and a bit of excess. Now, I'm doing my best at the 180. Minimizing communication to essential matters, no chit-chat, no asking how you're doing or telling me about your day, none of that. I think she's having a hard time with my hands-off approach. She's incapable of accepting blame for her actions, choosing to play the sufferer. It's a bit sad she doesn't realize why. I share blame for problems in the marriage. This falls entirely on her shoulders. I know the why may never be answered, but the questions will always remain. Tonight was good. We went to my youngest daughter's school musical. It was fun, but my wife sat next to my mom, who doesn't know. She knows. The other betrayed spouse texted me during the show. Memories haunt me, and every time I wishfully hope we can stay together, I think about how I would just be here again in a few months. I'm more and more resolved on divorce. I know it sounds silly. At this point, it should be absolutely unquestionable and the only way forward. but I still reflect on our life and family, wishing we could fix everything and move on. But those moments are just moments, I guess. It's part of the process because they only last for moments, and then the reality that she's not worth staying with reasserts itself. I think that's progress. As the question has been asked here so many times, why? What has caused this seemingly normal person, brought up in a very Christian home and proud of her Christianity, to do something so utterly abhorrent to the very idea and moral boundary she learned from her earliest childhood? Why? The big finale happened tonight. I tracked her to the parking lot where her car sat for a while, then went to a store and returned to the lot. As she sat there, I wondered what the hell was going on. I figured she was with him, so I went to check it out. Sure enough, there was her car, with his right next to it. I called his wife, we'd been talking for a few days, and she suggested I go say hi and grab a picture. So I did. I told her not to come home tonight. Heading home afterward, she called me in tears, saying she's sorry. I agreed to let her come and grab her things so she can be gone for a bit. So now all questions are answered, and the story has been written. On to the next phase of this little journey. But not so fast. The DNA results of my 3 children have been sitting in the storage where we store our mail for everyone to collect. I had already forgotten about it. It's been sitting there for a couple of weeks. I don't receive a lot of paper mail, which is why I forgot, maybe because I didn't care to check because I thought they were all mine. But unfortunately, my first son isn't mine. I was so shocked to my core. I didn't expect that. She must have been cheating on me during the first years of our marriage. My heart is shattered into different pieces, and I know I have to break the sad news to my children. I'm not going to hide secrets from my children, so I told my son last night. Lots of hugging, lots of crying. My soon-to-be ex-wife was still out of the house since I caught her having an affair with the partner in his car. He's not my biological son, but I have raised him, so he is mine. He's 20 and a man that every father would be proud of. He's not ready to confront his mom. I called my soon-to-be ex-wife on her phone and told her about it. All she did was cry and apologize. She said she wanted to come home, but I told her that it would be a good idea for her to remain wherever she is for the foreseeable future. Truth be told, I feel pretty good. DNA or not, he's still my son. I've never been this close to my kids, and I tell them I love them every day. I'm more relaxed now, and it's over. No more lying, no more worrying. My kids and I are still recovering, but we are at peace. In the coming days, we'll go through emotions, but I see a clear path out of this now.
Doug had been my closest friend for as long as I could remember. We met back in high school where he stood out as the brightest student in our class, while I, Stan, hovered around the top rankings. Though he took an unconventional route, leaving college after just a year, Doug's sharp mind and talent for finance never ceased to amaze me. By our late 20s, Doug had already amassed a fortune, turning a modest inheritance into a significant wealth through diligent self-study and smart investments. Unlike others with similar fortunes, he never showed off. Instead, he used his resources to create a luxurious but inviting home where friends, including my wife Heather and me, could gather. Heather, my vibrant partner of 4 years, had a way of bringing light to any room she entered. From the moment we met, I was drawn to her quick wit and infectious laugh, though our life together had its occasional challenges. I never doubted that those years were some of my happiest. That evening, Doug was hosting his big New Year's Eve party, an event that had become an annual tradition. I looked forward to spending the night in a lively atmosphere, reconnecting with old friends, and most of all, sharing moments of joy and renewal with Heather by my side. I walked up to Doug's front door and rang the bell, feeling a rush of excitement as I pulled Heather close for a quick kiss. Her smile, her warmth, these were moments I held dear. The sound of music and the hum of voices hinted at the size of the crowd inside. Doug's parties were always big, but tonight's turnout seemed even grander. When the door finally opened, there he stood, his face breaking into a wide grin as he waved us in. The number of cars outside had been a clue, but seeing the sea of guests confirmed it. Tonight was going to be unforgettable. Just as I was about to ring the bell again, Doug opened the door and greeted us loudly, welcoming us inside. I had guessed from the number of parked cars that the party would be huge, but I was still surprised by the crowd in his home. Doug gave Heather a warm hug and a light kiss on the cheek before guiding her in. He then shook my hand and stepped aside so I could enter. A maid took our coats and disappeared with them. Doug walked with us, saying, "It's so great to see you both. I don't love having parties this big, but I feel obligated to invite everyone." Business or social ties bind me to most guests, except for a few good friends like you two. Clarissa is around here somewhere, probably dodging wandering hands as usual. The night continued. Heather and I danced, ate, and drank more than we should have. We didn't mind because we knew we had a room upstairs for when we needed it. We were among the few invited to stay the night, so we didn't have to worry about driving or finding a cab or having one of us stay sober. I worked in the investment field, and I was one of the top brokers in my office and ranked in the top quarter of brokers company-wide. So I was familiar with many guests in the room. I agreed with Doug's sentiments. Quite a few were unpleasant characters. Heather, being as beautiful as she was, had to fend off attention, much like Doug's Clarissa. Throughout the night, I used the time to network, greeting clients and reaching out to potential new ones. I kept an eye on Heather as the evening wore on. Though I completely trusted her, I couldn't help feeling a bit jealous. I made a point to step in when I saw men trying to charm her a bit too much. Each time I did, Heather rewarded me with a smile and a soft kiss, whispering, "Thank you," or "Thanks for saving me, honey." This evening was no different. I approached whenever I saw her trying to escape unwanted attention, and she would thank me with a smile, a hug, or a kiss on the cheek. We'd talk for a bit, dance or drink together, and then go our separate ways. As the night wore on and guests began to leave, only those staying until midnight remained. I noticed a particular man who seemed to be following Heather, his eyes never leaving her. He was fixated, clearly smitten, and seized every chance to stay close. At first, Heather ignored him or walked away, but as the night went on, she started lingering near him, even smiling or laughing at his comments. Occasionally, she would touch his forearm lightly. This wasn't typical of Heather. She never flirted that long with any man, especially a stranger. Doug caught me watching them just before midnight and came over. "That's Jonathan Douglas with Heather. He's a real idiot, a top-tier ladies' man. I didn't even invite him. One of the women I invited brought him as her date. I haven't seen them together since you and Heather arrived." Doug stood next to me, scanning the room carefully. A curious expression crossed his face. "Actually, it seems like Douglas's date already left tonight." She watched him follow Heather around for a bit, then I saw them having a pretty heated conversation. I haven't seen her since. He's bad news, Stan, trouble with a capital T. He's married, but they're practically living apart. He preys on married women or anyone he thinks he can take advantage of. Strangely enough, he's already wealthy. Watch out for him. He could charm a nun and make her believe it was her idea and she's in love with him. For the third time that night, I walked over to separate Heather and Jonathan. He shot me a glare like he had before when I interrupted. I took Heather aside with a dismissive comment as we walked away. This time, Heather didn't thank me. She gave me a frustrated look and said, "Stan, what's wrong with you tonight? You could have just told me. I was enjoying talking to Jonathan. Why did you feel the need to pull me away? He's not like the usual creeps you save me from. He's really interesting with great stories. He's running for mayor and was sharing what it's like dealing with people during his campaign. When he found out I worked in public information and advertising, he started asking for advice on reaching voters. I think he might even offer me a job. Honey, I really need to stay in touch with him. Just think of what it could mean if I landed a role in his administration." "I don't care, Heather. I don't trust him, and I don't like him being near you. Doug says he's trouble, and I've heard bad things about him too. I want you to stay safe. From what I hear, the kind of job he's suggesting comes with strings attached." Heather looked at me, anger flashing across her face. I worried I'd gone too far, but then she smiled. Leaning in, she kissed my cheek and said, "Ah, that's sweet. I think you're actually jealous. But don't worry, sweetie, you're all mine." Later, as we mingled, I realized she had said I was all hers, not that she was all mine. That thought made me pause, wondering if I'd said too much or if she was hinting at something deeper. 3 months later, that night replayed vividly in my mind. The past 2 months had been turbulent at home. Not long after the party, Heather started coming home late from meetings or visits with her parents. When I asked, she'd become defensive or angry, saying she lost track of time or needed to finish a project. She also started volunteering at the local Republican Party, which took up more of her evening. Heather was known for her exceptional management skills and quickly became the volunteer office manager at the campaign headquarters, helping with informational strategies. From what I gathered, she brought order and became a popular volunteer, much like a husband unaware he's being deceived. With her increased absences, I noticed our closeness suffered. Rejections became more frequent. She always had reasons. She was tired, it was too late, or we were short on time, but it was clear. One day I confided in Doug about my marriage struggles. He gave me a worried look and finally said, "Stan, I'm concerned. I might be part of why your marriage has been strained recently. I heard Jonathan found another married woman. Word is he met her at a New Year's Eve party, and we both know where he was that night and who he spent time with. The rumor says she's also volunteering on his mayoral campaign." A wave of dizziness hit me, and I felt my breath catch. Doug noticed and kept talking. "Stan, what's wrong? You just went pale." I looked at Doug and said, "Heather started volunteering at the Republican Party office about an hour after work. On Saturdays, she always comes home late and refuses to share what she's been doing. Whenever I bring it up, she becomes defensive and angry. Lately, she even gets mad when I approach her in the evenings." Doug leaned back in his chair, pressing his lips together for a moment before saying, "Stan, I'm going to find out what's going on. And let's just say, if he's abusing my hospitality by getting involved with my best friend's wife, there will be consequences. I'd be furious if he pursued any married woman at one of my parties, but taking advantage of my hospitality by targeting your wife is unforgivable. I should have made him leave when his date left, but I was too focused on being a good host. If I've caused you trouble, my friend, I'll do everything I can to make it right. Let me tell you more about Doug. He's my best friend, someone I'd trust with my life, someone I'd even trust around my wife. He would never intentionally hurt me, and we were closer than brothers. Doug is exceptionally intelligent, probably the smartest person I've ever met. We were in the same high school class. He was the valedictorian, while I barely made it into the top 10 out of 223 students. He only attended 1 year of college before deciding it was a waste of time. Despite skipping classes and never studying, he still maintained a 4.0 GPA. Eventually, he took a few finance courses and then taught himself everything he needed to know about investing and finance. Doug's reason for learning business and finance was due to an inheritance of just over $70,000 from his grandparents during his freshman year. Unlike most young people, he didn't waste the money. He upgraded to a better used pickup truck and invested the rest in the stock market. He bought his first 2 stocks based on a broker's advice. They didn't perform well, and only the broker and the firm profited. This experience frustrated Doug, so he began to study the market. He watched CNBC, read extensively, and conducted research. He opened an account at a discount brokerage, moved all his savings there, and began investing on his own. From his first independent trade, Doug started making money, far more than he did with the so-called experts. It helped that he began during the late 1980s tech boom and dot-com era. He rode the waves of volatile stocks, and although not every investment was profitable, he significantly grew his capital. He had the foresight to switch to safer stocks when things got rough, benefiting from the market's upward trends. Doug bought Berkshire Hathaway at just over $17,000 per share and sold it 3 years later at $72,357 per share. By then, he was a multimillionaire, investing with others in venture capital and real estate. I graduated college and worked as a salesman for a restaurant chain for 4 years. I didn't enjoy the travel and wanted to be serious with Heather, so I transitioned into becoming a stockbroker. Doug entrusted me with managing a portion of his wealth when I started, likely to support a friend, which made me feel guilty. I knew he didn't need my advice, but it felt charitable. Doug convinced me he needed me, citing 2 reasons. He wanted to spread his investments across multiple brokerages for security, and believed having someone inside the industry might uncover valuable information before he did. While we never considered anything close to insider trading, I occasionally found useful insights for him. We both thrived. Doug referred many friends and acquaintances who wanted full-service brokerage help, which boosted my income through deals I made. Doug didn't work outside his home. He spent 8 to 10 hours daily studying stocks and trading, but only for himself. He led an extravagant life and tried to include Heather and me in his social circle. We attended numerous charity events with him, often at his expense. Sometimes I covered the bills with my expense account as a broker. We joined him at political events, mingling with influential people in our community. And of course, we attended every party Doug hosted at his house. Friday night after my talk with Doug, we went to a $500 a plate political rally with him and his companion. Once again, Doug treated Heather and me to the meal. This time, Heather seemed even more hesitant to join us than usual. Unfortunately, I insisted she come, and I regret that decision to this day. I suppose the disaster our marriage was heading toward would have happened once Doug's investigators reported back on Heather. But at least I would have stayed in the dark a bit longer. That dinner marked the beginning of the end. When we arrived, we realized we were at an event where the incumbent state Senate candidate was speaking to support other state and local candidates. The money for the tickets went to the state Republican Party, with some funds directed to local campaigns. What I didn't know was that the special guest would be a mayoral candidate for our city, Jonathan Douglas. When we entered, I saw Jonathan at the front of the room, smiling and talking with dignitaries. Heather pulled away slightly, and I turned to see her staring at Jonathan, her face glowing like someone in love. That's when I suspected I had lost her. "What?" I asked. Heather flinched, giving me a weak smile. "I'm sorry, honey. I didn't know this was his event." She looked so guilty that I questioned if she was being truthful, but said nothing. She must have known Jonathan would be there, given her part-time work at campaign headquarters. Now I understood her reluctance to come. I glanced at Doug, who had been observing us. He turned to look at Jonathan, then smiled and guided Heather to a chair, helping her sit down before seating Clarissa to his left. As I passed Doug, he said, "I'm sorry, Stan. I didn't know he'd be part of this when I invited you. I saw her reaction. I hope I'm wrong. But I have a meeting set for Monday with someone I want you to meet. Can we do lunch at 11:30? Heather finished her meal and excused herself to the restroom. I noticed Jonathan slipping out through another door. I thought for a moment, then stood to follow. Doug grabbed my shoulder. "No, Stan, let it go. If it's true, it's too late anyway. Just wait until Monday, please." Later that night, I lost track of Heather again. After returning from the restroom, I went searching and found myself backstage. I heard low voices and soft moans. One of them was unmistakably Heather's. Anger surged as I moved toward the sounds, tripping over a rope and making noise. Heather's voice broke the silence. "Oh, someone's coming. I need to go." Jonathan responded quickly, his tone urgent. "Honey, if we get caught now, it'll be bad for both of us. I'll see you at the office. I love you." A brief kiss followed, then the sound of hurried footsteps fading away. I rushed after them but was too late to confirm what I suspected, that it was Heather and Jonathan. As I turned back, I ran into Doug, who looked furious. He grabbed my arm, forcing me to stop and face him. "Stan, I warned you to stay out of this," Doug snapped. "My team needs time to gather evidence before you do something reckless. If she's cheating, and I believe she is, we need proof so you can handle this smartly and come out ahead in a divorce if that's what you choose. The way you're going, you'll only hurt yourself in court." After calming me a bit, Doug said, "I saw them heading down another hallway. They stopped at a door and she looked around for you. When she didn't see you, she got scared and told him she thought you were searching for them. Now he's suspicious, and it'll be harder for you to expose him." When Doug and I returned to the table, we put on a show, making sure Heather and the others noticed us laughing and sharing a pocket flask. Heather's eyes flicked to me as I sat beside her and asked, "Where have you two been?" Clarissa wrapped her arms around Doug, smiling mischievously. "Next time I catch you two sneaking out for a drink, I'm either joining or turning you in. Now, pass that flask." We exchanged glances as Heather visibly relaxed. She turned to Clarissa, curiosity in her voice. "Is that what they were doing? I was wondering where they went when I couldn't find them." Clarissa laughed, adding, "Oh yes, I tried to catch them to claim my share before they got back, but they were too quick for me." Later, during the dance, I had my turn with Clarissa. She leaned in close, and when I tried to glance around the room, she held me steady, keeping my attention on her. She kissed my cheek lightly and whispered, "No, Stan, don't look over there. Just dance with me, and try to enjoy tonight. I know what you're going through, and it's only going to get worse. Just remember, Doug and I are here for you, and always." I relaxed a bit and returned her kiss gently. "Thanks for helping keep things light. I nearly lost my cool, and Doug says that would be a huge mistake. I want to tear that idiot apart so badly, I can't stand it." The following days and weekend were difficult. I cycled between fear and anger. Deep down, I realized Heather had already emotionally distanced herself from me, and it was only a matter of time before she left physically. We hadn't been a happy couple for weeks. I started pulling back emotionally, even though I didn't have concrete proof she was cheating. If she wasn't, then something else was wrong, because we weren't the same loving couple we used to be. Finally, the day of my meeting with Doug and his friend arrived. I suspected this friend would be a private investigator. Anxiety churned in my stomach, and I felt sick. My anger simmered, and I knew they could both see it. I was terrified of what I might find out, but also desperate to know the truth. Doug stood to greet me as I approached, shook my hand, and hugged me. After the greetings, he introduced me to Simon Hobbs, an investigator. We sat for a moment, scanning the menu before placing our orders. Once the waitress left, Doug said, "Let's get the unpleasant part over with, shall we?" He glanced at Simon and then at me. Simon opened his briefcase and took out a large envelope, handing it to me. "We've been monitoring your wife and Mr. Douglas at Doug's request. Surveillance lasted 20 days, ending last Saturday night. In that time, we discovered they had lunch together daily, except Sundays when she stayed home. These lunches were held at various upscale hotels, followed by trips to a room rented by Mr. Douglas's campaign. On 8 separate occasions, we entered the room posing as room service staff. Each time, the bed was clearly used. Photos and documentation are in the report. We also made audio recordings by placing a microphone under the door. They engaged in intimate activities during each hotel visit." Simon continued. "We also noted inappropriate interactions at or after the campaign office on multiple occasions. We photographed them together 3 times at the office and once at a local bar event with friends and supporters. The most significant discovery was how Mr. Douglas used your wife to gain support from the municipal employees' union. They met with union president Stephen Negrano at a gentleman's club. He seemed very taken with your wife, and we captured photos of her sitting on his lap." Simon paused before adding, "My team managed to record this interaction. Listen to this segment. Then we'll discuss it further." He placed a small laptop on the table and played the audio. "You'll receive this DVD with your report, but I wanted to talk this over before we end today. My operative was quite confident this would interest your attorney." Doug and I leaned in, watching and listening closely. In the footage, Heather sat between Jonathan and Stephen, with both men leaning in to speak to her, Jonathan's hands roaming. Heather could be heard saying, "Stop that." But Jonathan replied, "Heather, you know you like this. Just relax and go with it. It's not as if anyone will notice here." Jonathan leaned in and kissed her while Stephen said, "Jonathan, you know what's needed for the union's support. I want a weekend with this lady. If I get that, the union will back your campaign." Heather stiffened and tried to stand, whispering sharply, "No, that's not happening. Let go of me." Stephen looked at Jonathan, raising an eyebrow. Jonathan swallowed and leaned into Heather, saying, "We really need this, honey. Just go along and help me out. It's for our future, and it's not like you haven't done this before. Just tell your husband you have a work meeting this weekend." On the video, Heather looked shocked, resisted briefly, and then visibly relaxed. We saw the undeniable proof of her betrayal. Around this time, the club manager approached their table, glancing nervously at Heather and the men beside her. He stuttered as he spoke. "Mr. Negrano, I've done a lot for you, but I've been warned that you and the others have become too noticeable. Lieutenant Jones said the chief is sending detectives here to crack down on scenes like this. If we're caught, I'll be jailed. Could you please move this to a back room or the hotel? This business is my livelihood." Stephen laughed and turned to the large man on the other side of the table. "Hey, Ralph, give Joe a couple thousand for his trouble. The lady and I are heading to the DoubleTree for the weekend. Get it set up like a union leadership meeting, the usual way." I felt a surge of anger and started to rise. That lying woman. She told me she had an emergency work project and was flying to San Francisco last weekend. Doug and Simon quickly pulled me back into my seat. Simon said, "Hold on, sir. Let me fast forward to show you one more segment, and then you can read the full report. We need to talk about some of this, but I thought you'd want to see the DVD first." My operative stopped recording at the club and called for backup. They reached the DoubleTree Hotel ahead of the group. When the men checked in, my operatives, dressed in hotel uniforms, followed them. After the room was inspected, my team entered and set up flowers, pillows, and other items. Simon smiled as he explained. The older man even sent his assistant for fresh flowers and champagne to give them an excuse to linger in the room. We managed to install cameras and microphones in the main room and both bedrooms. By the time your wife and Stanley returned, they were drunk. The footage captured everything. Simon resumed the DVD on his laptop. Heather and Stanley entered the suite and shut the door, heading to the bedroom where they engaged in intimate activities. Simon turned off the video and looked at me. Your wife stayed in that room until checkout on Monday. During that time, she was involved with several senior union officials, including Stephen. Late Saturday night, Jonathan joined them, and he, the director, and Stephen spent most of the night with her. We have footage of them plotting the misuse of union funds to back Jonathan's campaign, and pictures of Senator Nussbaum and 2 judges joining in with Heather and Jonathan. Records indicate that he traded her favors for endorsements. The investigator paused before continuing. During your attempt to confront your wife and Douglas at the election dinner, they were about to engage in inappropriate behavior backstage when she heard you and stopped him. They ran when they realized you were close. We have images from that incident, and it would have been better if you hadn't intervened. Photos of that situation would have been highly damaging. At least you didn't get caught or create a scene that could have hurt your case. We've compiled the entire report and can share it with your attorney if needed. Our investigation fees cover any necessary court testimony. I'd suggest continued surveillance for potential criminal charges. Although this is typically police work, presenting documented misuse of campaign funds and conspiracy to the authorities and the FBI will make them take it seriously. Plus, if you file for divorce and your wife ends up prosecuted, you'll be in a better position for a favorable settlement. Despite expecting this, I was stunned and distressed. The level of betrayal Heather demonstrated during surveillance was staggering. The documents revealed she believed she was in love with Jonathan and was planning her departure from me. She spoke excitedly about the role she was promised in his administration if he won the mayoral race. What shocked me most was her willingness to spend the weekend at the DoubleTree and the extent of what she did for Jonathan and his associates. I always knew Heather was ambitious and admired by influential people, but I couldn't believe she'd go to such lengths to get what she wanted. I felt almost physically sick. I hadn't eaten much, and I noticed Doug hadn't either. After the investigator left, we each had a few drinks. We sat in silence for a while, deep in thought, until Doug spoke. Stan, I'm sorry for wrecking your marriage. I take full responsibility for your troubles and will do my best to make it up to you. I know I can't undo what happened, but I'll help in any way I can. I'll find you a good lawyer if... No, not just for the divorce. I'll give you whatever support you need until you're back to how you were before, as much as possible. I pushed back from the table and looked at Doug, then start finding a lawyer. I was almost ready to give her an ultimatum, either stop this behavior or we're getting a divorce, even before I knew for sure she was cheating. Now, there's no way I'm letting her walk away unscathed. I can't believe she did those things. I wonder when she changed or if I ever really knew her at all. As for everything else, I continued, Heather's cheating isn't your fault, and you don't owe me anything for it. On Thursday, Doug called and said, Stan, I found a top-notch lawyer for you. She has a real passion for taking down cheaters and always sides with the innocent in divorce cases. She can't stand public figures and businessmen who misuse their power to cheat. If you play this right, you can not only leave Heather and keep most of your assets, but also take Jonathan down. Doug gave me her name and number, and I called that afternoon to set up a consultation. When I mentioned my name, the assistant said they'd been expecting my call and offered an appointment for 9 a.m. the next morning. I accepted and was given a list of items to bring and information to prepare. When I arrived, I was promptly shown into the office. My new attorney, Sally, made a strong impression, and we quickly got into a comfortable discussion about my goals for the divorce. I told her, I want to come out of this marriage with everything I have. I know that's unlikely, but that's my goal. And I want to sue the man who stole my wife for everything possible. I want him to lose the election and end up with nothing. Sally leaned back in her chair, rocking slightly as she considered the situation. A small smile crossed her lips. Do you really want this? Or do you want to financially ruin him, destroy his reputation, and send him to prison? If we handle this strategically, we could probably get him jail time. I've read part of the investigator's report, and it's very compelling. I'm sorry for what you're going through, but the evidence is strong enough to take down most of the major players involved in this mess. Plus, I'm obligated to share the report with the authorities since federal laws were violated. If we notify them first and then file for divorce, it'll hit him harder. But if you file for divorce first, he'll have time to escape or delay the fallout. I clenched my fists, my voice steady with anger. I don't care how it's done, as long as it hurts him and everyone else involved. Heather is absolutely guilty. There's no doubt about it. From what I saw, he pursued her relentlessly until she finally gave in. She always wore her wedding ring, so he knew she was married. I even heard tapes where they mocked me and talked about their plans for when she would leave me. Sally and I went over all the details, and I made my decision. I instructed her to prepare and file the divorce papers right away. We agreed that the investigator's report should be handed over to the FBI to initiate an investigation into campaign finance violations and misuse of union and city funds. Sally advised me to accompany the bailiff when Heather was served and when Mr. Douglas was warned of the impending lawsuit. If he acts like most powerful people, he'll either threaten you, try to have you fired, or threaten a countersuit, she said. Stand firm, and he may try to settle with you in secret. If he does, depending on where the funds come from, we could pursue additional campaign law charges. Politicians often try to use campaign funds to cover things up, so be ready for that possibility. Sally reached into her desk and handed me a small microphone and recorder. She said, "I want you to carry this with you at all times and keep it on. Hide the microphone in your hair and keep the recorder in your car. The transmitter's range is about half a mile. If your car is out of range, the microphone can record up to 6 hours. Once you're within range, the recordings will automatically download. If you give me your keys, I'll have someone install the recorder in your car while we finish up here. Also, I suggest either rehiring your private investigator or letting me find one to continue monitoring your wife and Mr. Douglas. I've learned that Mrs. Malone isn't the first married woman he's pursued, and when caught, he has tried illegal ways to cover it up. If we capture their plans on tape this time, we can really corner both him and your wife." I smiled and said, "The detective suggested the same thing. I'm keeping him on standby." On Thursday morning, Sally called me. "Mr. Malone, we're ready to file the divorce papers and serve them to your wife. Do you still want to attend and make your remarks?" "Oh, absolutely," I replied. "I might even get some satisfaction out of it." I was also thinking, shouldn't we serve her at campaign headquarters this Friday night? There was a pause before Sally responded, "No, Stan, I don't think that's a good idea. If you serve her there and make your statements, everyone at the campaign will know about it almost instantly. It'll be in the newspapers the next day, and Mr. Douglas, feeling cornered and publicly humiliated, won't have any incentive to retaliate or try to make a deal. I suggest serving her when she's alone or just with him." I nodded, understanding her point. "I see what you mean. Why don't we follow them and see if they go out alone tomorrow night? Heather usually doesn't come home until almost midnight on Fridays. According to the investigator's report, they often spend Friday nights at a hotel, the same one they visit during the day. Could we serve them there and maybe catch them in the act?" Sally agreed, and we planned for the bailiff and me to interrupt their meeting at the hotel room Friday night. When I entered my office, 2 men in suits were waiting for me. They introduced themselves and said they wanted to discuss managing some funds for their widowed mother. I invited them in, but after I closed the door, they showed me their FBI badges. They wanted to talk about my interest in Jonathan, as they were building a case based on the material my lawyer had provided. When they learned I planned to join the bailiff and record the event, they asked if I would wear one of their recording devices. This made me uneasy, as I worried it might affect my chances of securing a financial settlement from Jonathan. However, I couldn't find a good reason to refuse, so I agreed to wear their wire. That night, we followed the unsuspecting couple from campaign headquarters to the hotel. They left at 7 p.m. and were in the room by 7:30. Our group was so large it felt like a convoy, and I worried they might notice. After they checked into the hotel, we waited nearly an hour. I had brought my camera to document the moment, even though I'm not one for home videos. This was an exception. Just as we prepared to knock on the door, we got an unexpected break. The elevator opened and a waiter stepped out with a cart. He approached the room and looked at us curiously. I smiled, pointed to the door, and said, "Go on in. We didn't mean to interrupt Mr. Douglas's dinner. We'll be right behind you." The waiter smiled back. "No problem," he said. He knocked, announced room service, and when Jonathan opened the door, he entered. The process server and I waited until the waiter came out. When he did, I moved to keep the door from closing. The process server and I slipped inside quietly. We stood near the door, hidden from view, and waited for Jonathan and Heather to begin their meal before stepping into full view. When we stepped into the room, I was slightly ahead of the others. The scene in front of me left me shocked, horrified, and heartbroken. Even though I had seen the investigator's report, witnessing it firsthand was different. Both of them looked euphoric. Finally, I nodded to the process server who stepped into the room. The process server stepped forward and asked, "Are you Jonathan Douglas and Heather Malone?" Heather gasped, and Jonathan's face contorted with anger as he stood abruptly. "Yes, you idiot, I am. Now get out of my hotel room. How did you even get in here?" "Sir, The room service waiter let us in as he left. "Didn't you hear us ask if we could come in? I thought you had invited us." The process server moved closer and handed Heather the divorce papers. "You have been served," he said firmly. I stepped further into the room, and Heather's eyes widened as she noticed me for the first time. "Stan, damn you, what are you doing here? And what is this divorce? If you don't stop this madness, you'll end up with nothing. I'll take it all." "No, Heather, you won't," I said coldly. "If you know what's good for you, you'll sign the papers and accept the deal I offered. Once I'm through with you, I'm going after him. I'm going to sue Jonathan and his campaign for mental anguish and alienation of affection. Lucky for me, we live in a state that still allows those kinds of lawsuits. And as a bonus, this will put a dent in his election campaign. You're about to lose everything." Heather didn't come home that night, and I heard nothing from her until the following Wednesday. That morning, my office phone rang, and her voice came through the line, cold and direct. "Jonathan and I want to meet to discuss this situation. We've booked a meeting room at the DoubleTree Hotel for tonight. We want to resolve this and move forward. Be there at 7. There was no invitation, just an expectation. I called Sally to inform her of the call and then reached out to my FBI contact. Both Sally and the FBI advised me to attend. Sally assured me she would come along, and the FBI said they'd have support nearby if needed. When I arrived at the hotel, the receptionist directed me to a small meeting room down the hall. A large man stood guard at the entrance, blocking my way as I approached. "There's a private meeting in progress, sir," he said firmly. "I'm Stan Malone, and I'm expected," I replied. He scrutinized my ID before giving a nod. Turning to the door, he knocked twice. The door creaked open just enough for him to speak through the gap. "Mr. Malone is here, sir," he announced. I couldn't hear the response, but the door closed. The guard then said, "I need to search you. Please empty your pockets into the tray." After complying, I became annoyed and demanded an explanation for the search. The guard smirked and said, "Political figures have enemies, sir, and Mr. Douglas doesn't want any risks." I suspected they were looking for recording devices, but didn't comment. My hair was long enough to hide the small transmitters glued to my scalp. After the search, it took about 5 minutes before the door opened, allowing me to enter. Heather was sitting at the table, looking at me with guilt written all over her flushed face. Anger bubbled up in me as I processed what she had likely done. Jonathan sat there smirking, his eyes gleaming, clearly relishing the fact that he had just been with my wife. The meeting played out just as Sally and I expected. Jonathan threatened me, first with losing my job, and then with physical damage if I didn't offer Heather a better settlement and drop my plans for lawsuits against him and his campaign. I leaned back in my chair and said, "Listen, mister, I know you and your friends might manage to hurt or even eliminate me, but that won't save you. I've taken every precaution and prepared multiple packages to be mailed out. If anything happens to me or my family, even if I'm in an accident, those packages will be sent. You and I both know that not all media can be controlled. Some of it will get published, especially if I'm seriously hurt or liquidated. You will go down." I saw anger flash across Jonathan's face and noticed him tense. Something I had learned over the years meant Heather was furious. I smiled and continued speaking. "I know what you just did before I arrived, and I have pictures of you doing it multiple times. I even have evidence of your meeting last week at the DoubleTree with union leaders and senior city officials. Do you really think they'll thank you for dragging them into this? If anything happens to me, those documents will expose them, my wife and you. We both know many of them have dangerous connections." Heather glared at me while Jonathan looked a bit unsettled. He tried to maintain his composure and said, "You heard me. Drop your threats and handle this quietly or else. Now get out. I'm done talking." I stood up, locking eyes with Jonathan until he began to look uneasy. I could tell he felt cornered. I chuckled and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You know, Jonathan, I might reconsider if I received fair compensation in the divorce. And if the people in this town elect you, they deserve what they get." I headed straight home and found my private investigator already there with an FBI agent. They had removed their recording devices and secured them. The investigator said, "We captured everything, including Jonathan's conversation with your wife and his associates after you left. He's got someone tailing you now, tasked with watching and reporting anything suspicious. You're making him nervous." 3 days later, I made sure Jonathan's tail was nearby when I called my lawyer. We discussed the divorce, and as we wrapped up, I said, "Sally, I'm done waiting. I've told both Heather and Jonathan what I need to walk away, and they're stalling. Prepare the paperwork and file a lawsuit against Jonathan. Let's go for $10 million. That should catch his attention and make headlines." I smirked as I watched Jonathan's henchman retreat and make a frantic phone call, gesturing wildly. Without waiting for the outcome, I got in my car and drove home. That night, just as I was settling in, hunger gnawing at me since I hadn't eaten dinner, my phone rang. Jonathan's voice came through the line, careful not to mention that his man had overheard my conversation with Sally. "Listen, Malone," Jonathan began. "Heather and I talked, and we've decided to meet some of your demands. She'll sign the divorce papers as is, taking only her personal belongings and her pension. I'm prepared to offer an out-of-court settlement if you ensure this stays quiet." "Jonathan, all I can promise is that I won't be the one to leak anything," I replied, "but I can't guarantee someone else won't. There are likely hundreds of people who already know about your involvement with my wife." Jonathan's voice tightened. "Fine. Here's the deal. You sign a non-disclosure agreement and I'll transfer $1 million into your account. No questions asked. Heather will file the divorce papers and agree to your terms." I chuckled. "That's a small offer, Jonathan. My lawyer just filed a $10 million personal injury suit. I might not get the full amount, but you'll need to offer more than $1 million for me to consider dropping it. Besides, I could make even more from book and movie deals." There was a pause before Jonathan responded, frustration seeping through. All right. I might be able to go higher, but not by much. How about $1.7 million? That's the most I can transfer without drawing attention. I'll find a way to mask it as campaign expenses, but that's my best offer." "Deal," I said. "But I won't tell my lawyer to pause any actions until the money is in my account. Here's the number for my offshore account in the Caymans." What Jonathan didn't know was that I had set up the account in his name with his mailing address. I hoped federal investigators would trace the money from his campaign to the account. I planned to transfer the money as soon as it hit, so it couldn't be retrieved. Later that evening, my doorbell rang. The same man who guarded the door at my meeting with Jonathan and Heather stood there, holding a clipboard with a one-page legal document. "Mr. Douglas asked me to bring this for you to sign," he said. I read it, then looked at him. "It looks fine, but I need to review it with my lawyer before signing." "I really shouldn't leave without it," he replied. I sighed and closed the door in his face. I went to my office and called Sally, explaining the situation. She agreed to come over and review the document. It took her nearly an hour to arrive, but after reading it, she smiled and advised me to sign. 3 days later, I confirmed that the account balance in the Cayman Islands was $1,700,000. That same day, my attorney called to inform me that Heather had signed and returned the divorce agreement, which had been filed with the court. With the divorce being uncontested, it was expected to be finalized within 30 days. I had already transferred the money from the Cayman account in case Jonathan tried to reclaim it. I moved it through multiple global transactions before depositing it in another Cayman account under a different alias. I kept working through this difficult period, but my performance suffered. My commissions dropped to almost half of what they usually were, not just due to the economy, but also because I frequently relied on coworkers to handle my clients' transactions, splitting the commissions. After the divorce was finalized, I still felt off balance. My work mistakes increased, costing me significantly. If I made a wrong trade for a client, I had to fix it. I was constantly on edge, worried about an accident orchestrated by Jonathan and his allies as retaliation. My anxiety spiked as I waited for the feds to act against everyone involved. One night, while sitting at home wondering how my life had unraveled so fast, the doorbell rang. It was already 9 p.m. When I opened the door, I saw Heather. She was crying, a large red mark on her face that would surely bruise by morning. She looked at me briefly before dropping her eyes to the floor. "Stan, please, can I talk to you?" she said. I almost refused and shut the door in her face, but curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped aside, inviting her in without a word. I led her to the living room and sat in a chair, making sure the security cameras had a clear view. I positioned her on the couch so the cameras would capture her better. Heather sat, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she spoke. "Stan, I know it's too late, but She took a shaky breath. "I need to apologize for what I did to us. I knew better, but he broke through my defenses. You know how much I love attention and ambition. He figured out exactly how to play me, and I fell hard. He seemed like my perfect match, and I couldn't resist. I was blinded by the promise of a high-profile job he said I'd get after the election. I lost sight of what we had." Her sobs grew louder. She looked at me with tear-streaked eyes. "Do you know how angry I was at you on New Year's Eve when you tried to separate us? Stan, by then it was too late. The last time you pulled me away from Jonathan, we had just returned from one of Doug's bedrooms. He convinced me to be with him less than 3 hours after we met. I'm so sorry, but within 3 weeks of sneaking around, I was all in with him. He promised he'd divorce his wife and marry me after the election, saying he couldn't do it sooner without risking his campaign. I fell for the dream of being married to a mayor, maybe even a future senator or governor. She wiped her eyes and continued, "After you caused trouble, Jonathan started pulling away. Tonight at the office, I found him in the storage room with one of the young student volunteers. You were right, Stan. He was feeding her the same lies he told me, promising to leave his wife and marry her after the election. I confronted him and he laughed at me. He asked why I thought he'd marry an old, washed-up hoe like me, especially one who'd cheated on her husband. He said if I played nice, I could stay as his social secretary, maybe entertain his important clients as I'd done before. His new fling laughed at me, and when I slapped him, he slapped me back. Stan, I know it's too late for us, but I want you to know that I finally understand. I'm truly sorry for what I did to us, to you. If there's any way you could forgive me, I'd love to try again. I always knew I had a good man, but there was something about Jonathan that I couldn't resist. The idea of living a high-profile life with him clouded my judgment." Heather looked at me for another moment as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Then, with a hesitant smile, she stood, walked over to my chair, and kissed me gently on the cheek before running out of the room and out of the house. I sat there, stunned, before getting up and watching her car drive away. I sighed, wishing she had realized all of this before getting involved with Jonathan and his union and government allies. I turned and went back to the den. After a few days, I couldn't take the reminders and pain any longer. I decided to sell the house and hired a real estate agent to help me find a new home without the memories. I brought in a crew to pack up my belongings and send them to storage, another crew to clean the house, and one more to maintain the yard. I stayed in touch with Doug and Sally occasionally. They told me the feds were keeping the investigation under wraps, concerned about potential corruption within the police. We agreed that my name would stay out of it, and the information I provided Sally would only be used if necessary. Sally later informed me that the feds found enough evidence of corruption and were honoring that agreement. Almost 6 weeks after I decided to sell my house, I woke up to a special news bulletin airing on all the major news channels. The feds had arrested everyone involved in Jonathan's misuse of Heather, charging them with a range of offenses, including misuse of funds, corruption, misconduct, campaign violations, and racketeering. Jonathan was arrested for misusing campaign funds, accepting illegal donations, and selling rights to appointive positions in his anticipated administration. Heather, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, was also arrested for her involvement. I called Sally as soon as her office opened to learn more. She said that the information leaked had come from sources other than me, which meant Jonathan's payout to me was safe. He couldn't reclaim the money, and if he attempted to sue me over the non-disclosure agreement, I'd likely win, since the news attributed the tip to 2 campaign staffers. I hoped I wouldn't be suspected of exposing union officials, as I didn't want any trouble from unsavory characters showing up at my door. I smiled, recalling how I had discreetly slipped incriminating notes and documents into the papers some staff handled when I was supposedly at the office looking for Heather. After finishing my call with Sally, I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. I had gotten my revenge on Jonathan and freed myself from Heather at only the cost of attorney fees. Plus, Jonathan's settlement had made me $1.7 million richer. Now, I could look forward to finding a decent woman to marry and starting a new chapter in my life. After those tumultuous events, life settled into a new, quieter normal. I had moved to a smaller, modern apartment that held no memories of my past with Heather. The sharp pain of betrayal dulled over time, leaving behind a deep sense of resilience. The news cycles continued to churn out updates on Jonathan's downfall, the investigations, and the trials of his associates. Heather's involvement was minor in comparison to the political heavyweights, but seeing her name associated with the scandal still sent a twinge through me. Doug and I continued our friendship, stronger now than ever before. He helped me reconnect with a sense of stability, arranging dinners and casual nights out that reminded me of simpler times before ambition and deceit had complicated everything. His loyalty and support were unwavering, a constant anchor. One crisp autumn evening, I stood on the balcony of my new place, watching the city skyline fade into twilight. The air felt different, lighter. For the first time in a long while, I breathed, without the weight of uncertainty pressing down on my chest. I'd learned that trust was fragile, ambition could consume, and loyalty was the rarest of virtues. A month later, while volunteering at a local charity event Doug had encouraged me to attend, I met someone new, Elena, a soft-spoken artist with kind eyes and an infectious laugh. Unlike the whirlwind that had been Heather, she exuded a calming energy that made every conversation feel like a quiet escape. I didn't rush into anything. I had learned the value of patience. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I found myself opening up, letting the cautious tendrils of hope take root once more. Life had changed, irrevocably and painfully, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and unexpectedly ready for a new beginning.
My cheating wife's actions destroyed our family, and karma didn't hesitate to deliver justice. I'm 57 years old, and I've been happily married to my sweetheart for 26 years. We'll call her Lucy. She wasn't just my wife, she was also my friend from college. We knew each other for a decade before tying the knot. We were friends for 2 years, then I pursued her romantically for another year. The rest of our years together were filled with beautiful moments. However, due to official circumstances, we had to live in different cities for several years. Despite the challenges of time and distance, Lucy and I have maintained a strong connection. She wasn't only my loving wife and the mother of our children, but also my closest friend from my college days. She understood me like no one else, which is why her betrayal shook me to my core. Just last week, we attended our college's alumni meeting, an annual event dedicated to our graduation 35 years ago. It's a big event, with famous singers and celebrities performing, eagerly anticipated by all alumni. This year, our group had the chance to reunite and see how our classmates had changed. Lucy and I were particularly excited because we were one of the few couples who found love in college and stayed together all these years. When we walked into the event, we were bursting with pride, ready to showcase our strong relationship. Little did I know that this excitement would lead me down the wrong path. We relished reuniting with our dear friends after many years apart. The atmosphere was lively and filled with laughter. We were savoring what felt like the height of happiness, but our joy was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar face. Let's call him Rick, a classmate who had always deeply admired Lucy during her college years. Lucy attracted the attention of many with her intelligence and charm, and I wasn't the only one taken with her. However, Rick stood out because his pursuit of her was marked by a sincerity that went beyond simple flirting. Despite Lucy's lack of interest, Rick was determined to win her over and wasn't willing to give up. He persistently pursued her throughout his college years, even after learning about our relationship and her love for me. I remained a confident partner, paying no heed to his advances because I knew our bond was strong. Rick and everyone else were well aware that Lucy was exceptional, but he continued to pursue her. I distinctly remember the moment when Rick found out that Lucy had chosen to marry me. One day, he approached me with a text message claiming that Lucy had made a serious mistake, expecting me to take care of her as deeply as he thought I could. Lucy and I found his immaturity and idealism amusing and just laughed it off. After that incident, we no longer crossed paths with Rick and heard nothing about him, assuming he had finally moved on. After all, 35 years had passed since college, and we had been married for 26 years. But to our surprise, on the day of the reunion, Rick approached us again, fixated on the chapter of his life connected to Lucy. When he warmly embraced each of us, we reciprocated, but Lucy preferred a more reserved approach and chose to shake hands. As Rick's gaze unsettled her, Rick took a seat across from Lucy, and his unusual, intense gaze attracted everyone's attention in the room. Unable to bear the tension, I asked if he had brought his family to the reunion, hoping to change the subject. To my surprise, he told me that at 40 he had been briefly married but was currently single. Rick admitted that his marriage had ended in divorce, and I expressed my sympathy. Unexpectedly, there was a bitter tone in his response. "Well, you should be sorry. After all, you stole my love." This ridiculous statement was accompanied by hysterical laughter. In my younger days, such provocations might have led to a physical confrontation, but now, as we approach 60, such trivial matters don't hold much weight. Rick's lack of intimidation allowed him to brush off his comments. Rick was the type of guy who wouldn't be chosen for a sports team, a brash talker whose jokes fell flat. Although everyone heard his insensitive remark, no one reacted, and a tangible discomfort settled in the air. Trying to diffuse the situation, we collectively decided to ignore him. While it was clear that Lucy was particularly affected by his words, her silence spoke volumes. Nancy and I, our close college friend, recognized that Lucy was upset and took her aside. We tried to lift her spirits by advising her not to pay attention to the behavior of someone so obsessed and to enjoy the rest of the evening in peace. Understanding Lucy's tendency to overthink, we comforted her, wanting to bring back her smile. We tried to help Lucy recover and calm down. Unexpectedly, Rick approached us, apparently eavesdropping on our conversation. To our surprise, he apologized, saying he didn't want to upset Lucy. On the contrary, he wanted to remind her that she still had an admirer, despite the passage of time and its impact on her appearance. I was outraged by his rude words but managed to stay composed, firmly telling him to leave us alone. Rick was genuinely sorry for the trouble, and Lucy firmly asked him to give us some space. But Rick continued to stand his ground, urging Lucy to forgive him so we could enjoy the remaining moments of our final gathering. His words touched my heart, making me realize it was time to let go of the past and move forward. This evening marked the end of our meetings with old friends and classmates, highlighting the pointlessness of dwelling on the past. Realizing this, Lucy embraced Rick, urging him to let go of their story and not return to her in the future. Holding each other, we headed to the dance floor to enjoy the celebration. As others joined us, the atmosphere became more festive and enjoyable. After a while, I noticed that Nancy and Lucy were in conversation, and Rick was standing nearby. He seemed to be talking animatedly and even dancing in a somewhat silly manner. Despite this, I was relieved that the earlier conflict had been resolved, allowing us to reflect on our shared history in a positive light. Throughout the evening, I kept a close watch on Lucy to see how she was feeling. I couldn't help but notice that Rick was whispering something to her, but I hoped it was nothing to worry about. Lucy responded to Rick with a smile and a nod, which eased my concerns. I figured their conversation was probably harmless because Lucy would have scolded him if it was inappropriate. Feeling more confident, I relaxed and enjoyed socializing with our friends and classmates. However, after about an hour, I realized that Lucy and Nancy were missing. At first, I didn't pay much attention because we were all catching up individually. But as time passed and they didn't return, I started to get worried. I actively began looking for them, growing increasingly concerned. I tried calling them, but they didn't answer, likely due to the loud music at the event. After waiting for about 30 minutes, Lucy finally showed up, but something seemed off. While her appearance remained the same, her behavior had inexplicably changed. She appeared like a completely different person, notably quiet and reserved, and she kept urging me to leave the event. Nancy joined us, but for the rest of the evening they didn't exchange a word, maintaining an awkward silence. Seeing that Lucy and Nancy avoided eye contact, I couldn't help but think they had a disagreement. I kept trying to get Lucy to explain why she seemed upset and wanted to leave early, but she stayed silent. Despite my desire to stay until the end of the party, Lucy's insistence on leaving forced us to cut the evening short. During the long journey home, Lucy stayed silent, and I grew increasingly concerned about her well-being. I asked her repeatedly about her condition, but she just said she was tired and needed rest. I was anxious because Lucy, who's usually full of energy, seemed upset for no apparent reason. Not knowing the cause of her distress, I was very worried. Hoping to understand what was going on, I mustered the courage to ask if Nancy was involved. But Lucy curtly replied with a no without offering any further explanation. Realizing that she needed privacy, I decided to give her space and went about my business once we got home. While many of our former classmates happily shared photos and chatted on social media about the reunion, I couldn't shake a feeling of sadness, knowing that this might be our last reunion. Lucy quietly got into bed and closed her eyes, as if she wanted to give the impression that she was already asleep. Exhausted, I finally got into bed around 2 a.m. and immediately fell asleep. I hadn't been asleep for long when Lucy woke me up sobbing. Tears streamed down her face and she sought comfort. I held her close, gently stroking her back, and asked if seeing old friends at the reunion had caused her emotional distress. She remained silent, continuing to cry. Understanding that words weren't enough, I held her tightly to show my support and understanding. Even though she didn't want to share her feelings, I allowed her to express her emotions, comforting her with my presence as she dealt with her worries. When her tears finally stopped, she confessed something that left me in shock. She admitted that she had cheated on me, not just with anyone, but with Rick. I was speechless, unable to say anything. I was paralyzed, trying to process these revelations. Images and thoughts from the previous evening flooded my mind. The last time I saw Lucy, she was dancing with Rick and Nancy, forming an unexpected trio with them. When she returned from the party with a grim expression, insisting on leaving immediately, it became clear that Nancy was aware of what had happened, which explained her upset behavior. Feeling helpless and unable to speak, I froze in place. Sensing my inner turmoil, Lucy finally decided to reveal the truth. She said that while they were dancing, Rick began apologizing for putting her in an awkward situation, especially after she had rejected his advances multiple times. He then showered her with compliments, admiring her strength. In the midst of the dance, Rick confessed that despite traveling the world, he had never met anyone as extraordinary as Lucy. She admitted that his sincerity charmed her and she enjoyed the compliments. Lucy, captivated, listened as he invited her for a walk, promising that it would be their last meeting. He insisted that she deserved to hear all his thoughts about her in their purest form. Initially, Lucy declined, but he continued to press, emphasizing that it was a chance to share his true feelings. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to join him, wanting to know what he had to say. Lucy went for a walk with Rick on the serene college campus, seeking peace and quiet. During their walk, Rick shared his long-standing love for her and confessed that he considered her the most extraordinary woman in the world. Their conversation revolved around different stories, but the core of it remained unchanged. Lucy admitted that she had been influenced by alcohol and had foolishly given in to his persuasive words. During their walk, Rick gently held her hands, which complicated the situation and weighed on Lucy's heart. Tears welled up in Lucy's eyes, and she sought solace in my presence. She shared painful details, recounting every intimate moment between her and Rick. The weight of her confession hung heavily in the air, and each word cut deeper into my heart. She went into excruciating detail, including the moment when guilt suddenly halted their actions, compelling her to push him away. I felt utterly powerless, and I couldn't respond to her desperate plea. Trying to gather my thoughts, I asked Lucy for some time alone. Despite my request, she continued to cry and beg for forgiveness. In an effort to console her, I suggested she rest a bit, promising that we could discuss the issue in the morning. As she clung to me tightly, expressing her fear of losing our connection, I remained still with my eyes closed, lost in deep contemplation. My mind replayed the events meticulously, examining each detail until a particular moment stood out. I recalled Rick's unsettling, victorious smile when Lucy returned from their ill-fated meeting. At that time, I didn't grasp the significance of Rick's smile, but in hindsight, I realized it was a triumph on his face, as if he had finally won Lucy over. This realization flooded me with anger and disgust, overwhelming any self-pity. Sharing a bed with Lucy at that point became unbearable. After watching her fall into a deep sleep following hours of tearful sobbing, I quietly left the bed and hastily packed my laptop, wallet, and other essentials into a backpack. The weight of my emotions was heavier than ever as I made the painful decision to leave our home. Despite everything, I couldn't deny the truth. I still loved her. After 26 years of marriage, I couldn't fathom life without her. Our marriage had given us a wonderful family, filled with love and cherished memories. But despite our strong bond, I knew I couldn't stay. Lucy knew me too well, and her persuasiveness would likely have deterred me from leaving if I stayed until morning. I sought refuge in a hotel and took the necessary steps to block her number and remove her from all social networks. Exhaustion overcame me as the sun rose, and I fell into a deep sleep. By 8 in the morning, my phone rang incessantly with calls from our children, who had no knowledge of the events between their parents. Lucy and I have 2 children, a 24-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, both currently attending college on the same campus. Reflecting on that fateful night, I now understand that my impulsive decision to leave Lucy had to be carefully planned. Pretending everything was normal after her betrayal was impossible. She was my best friend and the core of my soulmate. Trying to act or deceive her would be futile since she knew me better than anyone else. The idea of Lucy's betrayal had never crossed my mind, so I hadn't prepared a plan for how to handle such a situation. When the children began calling me, I was caught off guard, not knowing how to respond to the truth that shattered our family. Realizing I needed to speak to at least one of my children before taking further action, I turned to my son, who typically approaches situations more calmly and maturely. With a heavy heart, I informed him that his mother had cheated on me the previous night with someone from her past, an old lover, admirer, or maybe even a stalker. I explained that I needed time to sort things out and get my bearings. This revelation shocked him to the core. The idea that his own mother could act this way was incomprehensible. This made the situation even more painful. Our family had been known for its strength and love, and we had always been proud of our close bond. Our children, relatives, and friends admired our relationship. Now, all of that had been shattered due to Lucy's actions. My son couldn't come to terms with the fact that his mother was capable of such behavior and kept insisting that there must be some misunderstanding between us. Desperate for answers, he kept pressing me for details, trying to understand how and why her betrayal had occurred. Recognizing the emotional toll this was taking on my son, I understood that providing a detailed chronological account would only intensify his pain and possibly hinder his ability to move on. With a heavy heart, I acknowledged the gravity of the situation and expressed my sincere hope that it was all an elaborate joke. Sadly, I had to tell him that his mother had indeed confessed to her infidelity. Although he was 24 years old and had experienced heartbreak before, this betrayal hit him hard. Seeking understanding and trust, I asked him to promise to keep this information confidential until I was ready to share it with others. To defuse the situation and avoid further questions and concerns, I informed my daughter that I would be away on a business trip for a while due to work-related stress. As a result, the calls from our children stopped. The situation was as follows. While my daughter believed I had left for work, my son and Lucy knew we were separated. In the following days, I dived into online research, seeking top lawyers and solutions to our situation. During this time, I stumbled upon a subreddit where men shared their experiences dealing with issues similar to mine. As I delved into these online discussions, I found stories of people planning revenge on their unfaithful partners. Though I understood their anger, I couldn't fathom seeking revenge on Lucy. Deep down, my love for her remained unchanged. To deny that would be dishonest. But despite this love, I knew we could never be together again. Trust had been shattered beyond repair, and reconciliation seemed impossible. It was painful, but our paths had irreversibly diverged. As I contemplated how to handle this challenging situation, I wasn't sure if I could overcome it. There were numerous matters demanding my attention: work, the well-being of our children, property issues, and more. Tomorrow, I have a crucial meeting with a lawyer who will guide me through the legal aspects. Lucy and I are both management consultants, but in our early 40s, we left our stable jobs. Lucy pursued her passion for writing, while I became a business consultant, primarily working with startups. As a self-employed consultant, I don't have a fixed workplace. This has led me to consider the possibility of Lucy showing up at my workplace. After careful thought, I realized that given my working situation, it might not be easy for Lucy to locate me. Although I occasionally work from home, I also visit clients' offices. Working with multiple clients simultaneously makes it challenging to maintain complete anonymity. Nonetheless, Lucy hasn't managed to track me down. Approaching our 60 made us contemplate retirement. We'd put a lot of effort into planning our future, including saving to buy a beachfront home in the countryside. We aimed to make this purchase next year and had already identified potential properties that matched our desire for a peaceful retirement. Fortunately, we hadn't finalized the purchase of the beach house, and we were still negotiating with property owners. In hindsight, I'm incredibly thankful for this. If we had already bought the property, the situation would have been much more complicated. Just the thought is daunting. Meanwhile, Lucy has been persistent in trying to contact me. Since I decided to keep my distance, I consulted with a lawyer who advised me to inform our adult children about our separation. He also raised questions about property division, leading me to initially consider splitting it equally between Lucy and me. But upon reflection, I realized I needed to rethink my stance. Instead of seeking revenge by denying Lucy her share of our property, I decided to do the opposite. I believe she deserved her rightful half, as she had contributed as much as I had. However, I acknowledged that she also deserved the separation she sought. Having known Lucy for so long, I understood she'd be willing to give up her part of the property to reconcile and save our family. While the divorce papers were being prepared, I arranged a meeting with our children. I asked my son to discreetly bring my sister to a restaurant without revealing my presence. To my surprise, my daughter's reaction was intense when she saw me. She bombarded me with questions, including whether I had cheated on her mother after disappearing from her life. Seeing her in such distress, my heart sank. But I knew I had to stay calm for the sake of the children and the upcoming revelations. Gradually, I managed to reassure her that I hadn't been involved with anyone else. Then, with caution, I began revealing the truth in pieces. It was clear that my son already knew some of it, but my daughter was hearing the full story for the first time. Neither of them was prepared for what I had to say. My daughter's world crumbled when she learned her mother had cheated on me. For the past 15 days since I left our home, she had been staying with Lucy, overwhelmed with emotion. She embraced me tightly and tearfully asked for forgiveness for any ill feelings she had harbored against me. In a vulnerable moment, my children pleaded with me to consider giving our marriage another chance, but I remained firm in my decision to file for divorce. It was incredibly hard to see them cry, but they understood the depth of my pain and the importance of looking out for their own well-being during this tough time. My children made a sincere commitment to stand by my side. I assured them that the decision to separate was made by me and their mother alone, and wouldn't affect our love and support for them. My daughter expressed concern for Lucy's well-being, explaining that she was struggling with eating and sleeping. She mentioned that Lucy had gone from crying spells to restlessness and had been calling me continuously, deeply saddened by my absence and searching for me in my client offices. But every client informed her that I hadn't shown up at their offices for the past 2 weeks. Sensing her mother's anxiety, my daughter bravely asked Lucy if something had happened between us that she needed to know about. Lucy responded with silence to her daughter's question, and tears continued to flow incessantly. Unable to calm down, my daughter went to her room, isolating herself and succumbing to waves of sadness. Recognizing the emotional blow this had dealt to our children, I asked my daughter to stay home and support her mother during the divorce process. As we discussed Lucy's actions, I felt our children changing. Their initial sadness gradually gave way to anger, as they also felt betrayed by their mother's actions. They clearly bear the weight of the experiences and pain caused by the breakdown of our family. In this situation, we're all victims, but the blame for the destruction of our once strong family lies on one side. Despite the pain and betrayal caused by Lucy's actions, I'm determined not to let our children harbor hatred for their mother. On the contrary, I urge them to provide support during this difficult time. What happened next, however, was truly astonishing. A few days later, I received a message from Rick inquiring about Lucy's well-being. He brazenly stated that if I intended to divorce her because of her infidelity, then he was ready to intervene and take her for himself. In response, I made it clear that Lucy is a free woman who has the right to make her own choices. After our correspondence, I promptly blocked him, excluding any further contact with him from my life. Oddly enough, Rick's message didn't provoke much anger in me. I didn't want to be manipulated by this intruder. After all, I was never married to him, didn't love him, and didn't trust him. My deep connections were exclusively with Lucy, which is why her betrayal caused me such profound pain. It's not so much the feeling of insecurity that concerns me, but the emotional aftermath of her actions. If she wants to continue her relationship with Rick, it doesn't bother me, since the divorce papers are set to be delivered today. I eagerly await my daughter's call to learn how Lucy reacted to this development. Meanwhile, I need to address a multitude of crucial issues, including property division, retirement planning, and ensuring the safety and well-being of my children. These tasks demand careful consideration and resolution as I work to establish a solid foundation for the future. Surprisingly, Nancy didn't act surprised at all. She claimed to already know why we had separated. Curious, she started calling me to learn the details of how I discovered Lucy's infidelity. I informed Nancy that Lucy had admitted to being unfaithful. Nancy apologized and mentioned that she had previously warned Lucy about Rick and advised her not to spend time alone with him. Regrettably, Lucy chose to disregard Nancy's advice. But Nancy also shared a version of the story that differed from what Lucy had told me. According to Nancy, she and Lucy were happily dancing when Rick joined them and made advances on Lucy. He kept whispering in her ear, which made me doubt Lucy's explanation that it was an apology. Nancy's account painted a different picture, casting suspicion on Rick's intentions and Lucy's involvement. Nancy expressed her dissatisfaction with his advances and tried to intervene, noticing significant changes in Lucy's behavior. To Nancy's surprise, she discovered that Lucy enjoyed talking to Rick, which deeply concerned her. This complicated the situation further, raising questions about Lucy's feelings for Rick. When Rick suggested going for a walk, Lucy asked Nancy for advice, silently wondering what to do. Nancy strongly opposed the idea, emphasizing Rick's dangerous reputation. However, Lucy eventually agreed to the walk despite Nancy's reservations. Nancy was engrossed in conversation with friends and didn't immediately notice Lucy's absence. Gradually, she realized this and became worried. She searched for Lucy and found her with Rick in an unexpected place, the college pool locker room. This contradicted Lucy's claim that they were on the lawn. Nancy confronted them, interrupting their encounter and revealing that it was her presence, not Lucy's conscience, that stopped them. Despite the painful betrayal, I couldn't help but feel proud of Lucy for admitting her mistakes to me. Knowing the truth brought some comfort, but the betrayal still weighed on my heart. I initially believed her blame on intoxication, but I later realized it was a conscious choice. The fact that their encounter took place far from our original location at the college pool emphasized that it was deliberate, not a momentary weakness. It was clear that Lucy's actions were intentional. After listening to Nancy, I asked the pressing question, could I consider giving Lucy another chance? I was torn. Lucy had confessed, but Nancy's revelation of the differing versions added complexity. Lucy's deception left me in emotional shock. Meanwhile, my children shared concerning news about Lucy's deteriorating mental state. She fell into deep depression and was on the brink of self-harm. Learning of her condition, I turned to Nancy for support and advice. I explained the previous phone conversation to Nancy, where Lucy told me a different story. I asked Nancy to visit Lucy and have an honest conversation. It was evident that Lucy held a painful secret. I urged Nancy to inform Lucy that I now knew the whole truth and had decided not to forgive or rebuild our relationship. I suspected that Lucy was intentionally harming herself, so her well-being became my top concern. Lucy hoped for reconciliation, but Nancy visited as I requested and updated me. Lucy was on the path to recovery from her emotional struggles, and she had signed the divorce papers, which brought some relief. In light of recent events, I found motivation to wrap up my work commitments. Instead of settling down as planned, I felt compelled to choose a different path. I decided to embark on a solo journey, seeking new experiences and freeing myself from obligations. The prospect of escaping the restrictions of a permanent residence brought me joy and promised an improved mental state. I acknowledge that I may not be handling the situation perfectly, but I'm doing my best in these unpredictable times. I can only hope for the best in overcoming this challenging period. A year has gone by, and I want to update you on some developments. During this time, it felt like time passed slowly for me. After leaving our house, I stayed in a hotel for a few months and then rented an apartment while our divorce proceeded as planned. I continued to work, but I switched to clients that allowed me to work from home full-time. This change offered more flexibility and helped me adapt to my new life. Concerning our property division, Lucy received 50% of the money we had saved for our retirement home. Though it was tough to part with that money, I understood the importance of a fair split during our divorce. To ensure a fair distribution of the remaining 50%, which is rightfully mine, I decided to share it between my two children. They are old enough and independent, so having access to these funds can be useful for them. As for Lucy, she's still undergoing therapy to deal with her emotional issues. Nancy stays in touch with her and occasionally asks about my well-being. During a conversation with Nancy, she shared unexpected information about Lucy. It's crucial to handle this info cautiously, as Nancy still supports Lucy. Nevertheless, I'm willing to hear her perspective. It turns out that despite what I thought, there are reasons to be skeptical about how well I know Lucy. I held Lucy in high regard, considering her strong and determined, but it appears that loneliness may have influenced her decisions. According to what I learned, Lucy began communicating with Rick, and he reciprocated her feelings. Their relationship appeared to be flourishing until he found out about our impending divorce. Once Rick learned about the divorce, his behavior took an unexpected turn. He distanced himself from Lucy, leaving her confused and heartbroken. Despite her efforts to remind him of his previous expressions of love, he claimed his intentions were only for a casual encounter. He admitted he didn't want a long-term emotional relationship or marriage. Due to her strong-willed nature, this revelation left Lucy feeling betrayed and shattered her image of Rick's intentions. Their relationship seemed built on fleeting desires and empty promises, rather than genuine affection and commitment. It's difficult to fathom that Lucy begged Rick for a relationship, especially given his reputation for insincerity. Rick's true intentions were exposed when he revealed his desire for only a physical relationship, disregarding Lucy's need for emotional support. He also mentioned having a roommate with whom he was content. All his apparent love and admiration turned out to be a facade, which left Lucy feeling deceived and insulted. In a cruel final statement, Rick arrogantly claimed to have achieved his goals, even boasting about outsmarting Lucy. This revelation deeply unsettled Lucy, making her realize she had fallen for his lies and manipulations. A couple of weeks ago, I received an update on Lucy. My daughter had been living with her to provide companionship and support during her battle with depression since I left our home. However, after a year, my daughter reached her limit. Lucy's behavioral changes had become unbearable. Once emotionally strong, Lucy had transformed into a person filled with self-doubt and a constant need for attention. She had become unpredictable and unstable, displaying hysterical tendencies that strained others. Despite my daughter's best efforts, living with Lucy had become impossible. This was a stark contrast to the Lucy we once knew, highlighting the devastating impact of her actions and emotional experiences on her well-being. Lucy's mental state deteriorated, leading to delirium and confusion. She had turned into a controlling and possessive mother, frequently bombarding my children with phone calls if they didn't answer immediately. Whenever my daughter tried to address Lucy's stubborn behavior, Lucy became distressed and expressed her fear of losing them. She had been deeply terrified by my departure, and my children assured her that they wouldn't abandon her. They did everything in their power to help her with her depression, but if her controlling tendencies persisted, they might need to reconsider their stance. Lucy often engaged in intense arguments with her children, accusing them of not supporting her during the most challenging moments of her life. This behavior was unfamiliar to us. The children were shocked by Lucy's unusual conduct. Ultimately, they had a heated argument with her, making it clear that her actions had disrupted everyone's lives. Our once caring, reliable, and joyful family had become fragmented and distorted. It was hard for Lucy to accept that her own children held her responsible for these events. 2 weeks ago, my daughter decided to leave home. She informed me that she had done everything possible to help Lucy but couldn't put her own life on hold to care for her. I believe my daughter's decision was reasonable. It's crucial for her to move forward, just as it's essential for Lucy to take responsibility for her life. While it's natural for someone my age to find some satisfaction in seeing his unfaithful ex-wife suffer, I must admit that I felt no joy in this situation. Instead, I felt deep sadness for Lucy in her current state. Her poor decisions have led to a lifetime of suffering, and I genuinely hope she can recover her former self, regaining confidence and strength. Over the past year, I've traveled to 4 different countries. It has been an incredible journey, experiencing diverse cultures, savoring local cuisines, and embracing entirely new ways of life. Initially, I was disappointed to deviate from my retirement plan, which involved being with Lucy. However, I've come to appreciate the opportunity to immerse myself in various cultures and lifestyles. During my travels, I had the pleasure of meeting incredible people from various cities worldwide. Currently, I'm not involved in any romantic relationship, nor am I actively seeking one. I'm open to whatever the future might bring. To be honest, the last 2.5 years haven't seen any major events except for my extensive travels to over a dozen countries and rekindling my passion for painting. In the past month, I had the opportunity to reunite with Lucy after a 4-year gap. The reason for this unexpected encounter was my son's upcoming wedding. He found his life partner, and 2 months before the wedding, he wished for Lucy and me to meet the girl's parents. At first, I was hesitant, suggesting we meet at the wedding, but I eventually agreed to accompany Lucy to this significant event. I realized it wasn't about me, but my duty as a father. A week before the wedding, the girl's parents graciously hosted a dinner for us. Although I had doubts initially, I decided to attend at the last moment. It was emotionally challenging to see Lucy there. I would have preferred it to be just the 2 of us, but I knew I had to be there for my son, and both he and his fiancée were thrilled to see me. Her parents left a wonderful impression as kind and hospitable people. When I met the girl's father, it felt like we immediately clicked. We had a great conversation about his business, but I won't dwell on those details because I assume you're more interested in the situation with Lucy. So let's get to the point. When I entered the room, I noticed Lucy appeared visibly uneasy. Something had changed in her, a transformation in her eyes. She was no longer the woman I once knew. Although she smiled politely, there was tension in her. It was evident that she had distanced herself from me over time. Despite the years that had passed, Lucy still had her characteristic long hair, a consistent feature of her character. But I couldn't help but notice that these 4 years seemed to have taken a toll on her more than I expected. As we sat at the table, it turned out that my son hadn't disclosed the nature of our past relationship to the girl's parents. This would be the first meeting for both sets of parents. While this detail interested me, I didn't anticipate any issues arising from it. Initially, Lucy was quiet in the company of others, but when she found a moment to speak to me alone, she commented on my appearance, noting that I looked healthier and more energetic. I agreed and mentioned that I had intentionally removed all toxic elements from my life. This confession momentarily surprised her, and she discreetly looked around to ensure no one overheard our conversation. She curiously inquired about my current romantic status, but I deftly evaded the question, firmly stating that it shouldn't concern her. Throughout our conversation, I tried not to focus on her but engaged with the other guests. When the evening drew to a close and it was time to bid farewell, I warmly embraced everyone present. As we were about to leave, I simply nodded to Lucy and casually told her to take care of herself. This took her by surprise, and she abruptly stood up as I said my goodbyes to others. Although things happened quickly, I believe the exchange didn't appear too awkward to the others. Surprisingly, the meeting with Lucy turned out to be quite straightforward. From her behavior, it seemed she was either startled by my presence or felt too uncomfortable for a more open conversation. Regardless of her thoughts, I found it uninteresting to delve further into this matter and departed from the gathering. As I was about to leave, my son walked me outside and kindly invited me to spend the next few days with him. Unfortunately, I declined his generous offer but promised to call him soon. With those words, I headed to my hotel. It's important to note that I no longer have a fixed place of residence. I frequently travel, and when I return, I usually stay in hotels. Transitioning to a nomadic lifestyle wasn't easy after 26 years as a devoted family man. However, over time, I grew accustomed to this adventurous way of life and have come to fully enjoy the freedom it brings. I'd like to share more news with you. I now have a life partner. 2 years ago, during a trip to Tokyo, I met Ashlyn, a 52-year-old woman who had recently left an abusive relationship and embarked on her first solo journey. Our paths crossed while climbing a mountain, and we formed a genuine connection. At that time, neither of us sought a romantic relationship, so we developed a deep friendship. After my stay in Tokyo, I was planning to go to South Korea, and she intended to explore Thailand. Surprisingly, we continued to communicate over the next few months, nurturing our friendship. Recognizing our compatibility, we mutually decided to plan our future adventures together. Over the past year and a half, we've embarked on various journeys, exploring more than 8 countries. We've become travel companions, prioritizing the bond that connects us over rushing into a romantic relationship. In fact, for the first 2 months of traveling together, we maintained a platonic relationship. By mutual consent, we weren't in a hurry to know each other deeply, focusing on enjoying our discoveries and explorations. While continuing to travel, my children were aware of Ashlyn's presence in my life, but chose not to inform Lucy about it, fearing it might trigger her depression. Upon arriving at the hotel, I phoned my son to explain why I declined his offer to stay with him. I told him that Ashlyn had joined me on this trip and it wouldn't be fair to leave her alone. Additionally, I expressed my desire for Ashlyn to attend the wedding as my partner. Although my son liked the idea, he also expressed concern about Lucy's potential reaction. Nevertheless, I stood my ground, emphasizing the importance of Ashlyn attending the wedding and getting to know my family. I suggested my son involve my daughter in the conversation to discuss the matter collectively. Thankfully, my daughter supported my decision and agreed that Ashlyn should meet our family. With just a week left before the wedding, we spent our time exploring the city together, giving Ashlyn an unforgettable tour of Kentucky since it was her first visit. Finally, the wedding day arrived. As we entered the venue, I couldn't help but notice Lucy's fixed gaze on me. Lucy's reaction was intense when she spotted Ashlyn and me walking hand in hand to the wedding venue. Before the event, I had cautioned Ashlyn about the possibility of Lucy's unwanted behavior, but she assured me that she could handle it calmly. It was at that moment that I became personally aware of how much control Lucy still had over me following our separation. Lucy rushed toward us swiftly, grabbing my wrist, attempting to pull me aside. I firmly stated I didn't want to engage in a personal conversation with her. Lucy posed direct questions, inquiring if Ashlyn was my girlfriend and if I intended to marry her. I firmly replied that it was none of her business. With growing attention from other guests who noticed Lucy's tears and anger, I asked her to leave us alone. The wedding was about to begin, and her actions were disturbing the joyful atmosphere. My daughter tried to mediate and calm her mother, but Lucy stubbornly resisted. We implored her, stressing that her actions were spoiling the wedding for everyone. Lucy raised her voice, displaying her indifference to the situation. In response, my typically soft-spoken daughter intervened and became resolute. Not only did she maintain her composure, but she continued to give Lucy a stern and memorable lesson. I was taken aback by our daughter's unexpected outburst. With strong yet controlled anger, she conveyed a harsh truth that had been buried too long. She reminded Lucy that they were supposed to enter the wedding hall together as a family. Instead, Lucy's involvement with someone else was seen as an act of betrayal. My daughter presented Lucy with 2 options: accept the situation and move on, or my daughter would ensure her removal from the wedding before it started. The gravity of her words left no room for negotiation or further disruption. As a father, I initially stepped in to protect my daughter. However, I soon realized her resilience and strength, even in the face of her own mother's actions. With unwavering determination, my daughter pointed directly at Lucy, ensuring her words carried weight. By the way Lucy was squeezing my wrist, I could sense the tension building, and then she released her grip. We made eye contact, and her face trembled, conveying a mix of anger and betrayal. After a few moments of silence, Lucy turned and left without acknowledging Ashlyn. To my surprise and relief, my daughter took the initiative to apologize to Ashlyn on Lucy's behalf. Ashlyn warmly embraced both of us, and I expressed my pride in my daughter's strength and resilience, referring to her as my soldier. She was visibly emotional when I used that term. Lucy had caused suffering to those around her, but she'd always expected sympathy and care from certain friends over the years. Due to circumstances, my children didn't have a family home for special occasions, and I acknowledged my role in this outcome. Throughout the remainder of the wedding, Lucy grew increasingly irritated by our children's support for me. She distanced herself, often standing alone in corners or sitting by herself, appearing more distant than a groom's mother should be at such an event. She even chose not to participate in the family photo, further highlighting her sense of isolation. A few days ago, Nancy gave me a call. She mentioned that Lucy was upset that I was moving on with my life while she remained lonely. In response, I told Nancy that my children and I had reached a point where we couldn't bear Lucy's constant dramas any longer. I explained that Lucy was on her own path and she was free to live as she pleased. My primary goal now is to enjoy the remaining years of my life in peace. I'm considering the idea of being closer to my children and taking responsibility for their family gatherings. Even though they are grown, I believe it would provide them with a comfortable and stable environment where they can come together when needed. The recent wedding made me realize that a new phase of life is approaching, where I may become a grandparent. I don't feel the need to inform Lucy about this, and I'm content with that decision. Nancy also informed me that Lucy is in a bad condition, behaving inappropriately and experiencing panic attacks. I asked Nancy to stay with Lucy, offer her support, and promise to reach out to my daughter to help. Since my daughter was away, Nancy couldn't stay with Lucy for an extended period, and she was left alone in the house in such a terrible state. Before the next day arrived, my children and I received devastating news. In a state of mental breakdown, Lucy ran onto the road and was struck by a motorcyclist who couldn't react in time to avoid the collision. Lucy, the love of my life and the mother of my children, passed away instantly. It's really difficult for me to talk about it. Her body was terribly injured, resembling a disassembled doll. While I might blame myself for insisting on bringing my new partner to my son's wedding, we couldn't have continued to endure Lucy's manipulations for the rest of our lives. It all began with her betrayal, and no one is at fault for the path she chose.